I'm the Dolphin of France. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 476, The Atmosphere of Industry. Soon after, at the ceremony of Leopold II's coronation as King of Bohemia, the French envoy presented a congratulatory gift in public, an exquisite model of the villa and a bunch of gold-encrusted keys. This represents a luxurious property in the Garden of the Stars in Paris, worth 50,000 florins. Since Leopold II had to inherit more than 10 king titles, this gift was the most expensive in a single coronation ceremony. Immediately, Austrian nobles and foreign officials who came to congratulate began to inquire about the starry garden. The French envoy's entourage immediately enthusiastically became promoters. Soon, with the emblem of the Habsburg family hanging on a villa in the Garden of Stars and a large number of German wealthy people coming to inquire about real estate here, the rich in France could no longer sit still. Then they encountered an unheard of thing like a lottery for buying a house, but their desire to buy was even more aroused. And a house purchase number was directly sold for 5,000 francs. More than half a month later, all the properties in Starry Garden were booked out, and some people have even begun to inquire about the second phase of the project. On the other side, Joseph has launched a development plan for the wasteland between Paris and Versailles. This includes the construction of a large number of affordable housing to offset the impact of the Garden of Stars on Paris housing prices and to protect the living needs of ordinary Parisians in a house in the Louvre district of Paris. Anthony, a salesman from the Royal French Insurance Company, was telling the couple in front of him eloquently, whether it is an attack by gangsters or being thrown down by a carriage. As long as there is a disability, you will be there. I can get high compensation from personal accident insurance. He flipped through the documents in his hand. You can get a compensation of 800 francs for ordinary disability. If you die unfortunately, you can get a compensation of 1,500 francs. And you only need to pay an annual premium of 10 francs to get these protections. Oh, and the premium is as low as 7 francs for ladies and children. Mr. and Mrs. Evans looked at each other, feeling a little moved. They have just decided to purchase an education insurance. They just gave birth to a son this year and are discussing his future studies. The annual payment for this kind of education insurance is 80 francs. After 8 years of payment, all tuition fees for the son's ordinary school and university will be borne by the insurance company, and there will also be a monthly food subsidy of 6 francs. Note 1. What makes them most satisfied is that if their son does not go to college in the future, all the money will be returned when he is 20 years old. Afterwards, the insurance salesman introduced them to property insurance, medical insurance, pension insurance, etc. These are the latest insurance types launched by the Royal French Insurance Company. Of course, this was all planned by Joseph. These insurances, which may seem commonplace to people in later generations, are absolutely novel and attractive today when there are only navigation insurance and fire insurance. However, the probability of accidents in the 18th century was much higher than in the 21st century. So the Royal Insurance Company temporarily only marketed to nobles and wealthy businessmen. These people were willing to spend money for insurance, but were not as prone to accidents as ordinary people. In the end, the Evanses subscribed for an education insurance policy, and also purchased personal accident insurance for Mr. Evans. Salesperson Anthony immediately collected the deposit, issued a receipt, made an appointment to sign the contract, and immediately rushed to the next store. The sales of insurance have been very hot recently. He can even sell more than 10 units a day, and the commission makes his hands cramp. There are currently thousands of salespeople like him in France, and they are going around selling the company's latest insurance products. The Royal Insurance Company's daily income is close to 400,000 francs, and its ability to absorb funds is no weaker than that of banks. At the same time, the Royal French Insurance Company has also opened branches in the Netherlands, Austria, Sardinia and other places. In addition to the above mentioned general insurance items, sales staff are also focusing on recommending a product called financial insurance to customers. The buyer only needs to pay a certain amount of premium to the insurance company every year, a minimum of 300 francs, with no upper limit, after paying for 15 years. The buyer can receive 3% interest from the insurance company every month until death. And when the buyer turns 50 or dies, the premium will be fully refunded. People over 21 already know that this kind of insurance is actually a trap, but it is undeniable that, if you don't do calculations carefully, just from an intuitive feeling, financial insurance is simply too cost-effective. Especially for people who are still in feudal society, they like the feeling of stability and security. Very much, so the sales of financial insurance are booming in various countries. This alone can increase the income of the Royal Insurance Company by 2 to 3 million francs every month. As for the United Kingdom, the Royal Insurance Company did not directly open a branch there, but reopened an Atlantic Insurance Company, which has nothing to do with the Royal Insurance Company. If the British dare to carry out any continental equilibrium against France in the future, then this insurance company will probably go bankrupt to show them. According to Joseph's plan, when the tax collectors are abolished and the government takes back its tax rights, it should be able to raise more than 50 million francs through the real estate and insurance industry's southern suburbs of Paris in a luxurious and low-key villa. Goldmead walked into a spacious conference hall under the leadership of the valet. There were already more than a dozen people in the room, sitting around an oval conference table, chatting in twas and threes. When those people heard someone coming, they glanced at Goldmead casually, but they didn't care much, and continued their conversation. Goldmead didn't take it as an offense. He was just a small banker, and his business was mainly in the UK. It was not easy for him to be invited to attend this meeting today, so he naturally didn't care about other people's attitudes. At the gesture of the butler, he sat on the chair near the end and immediately noticed the Livable logo printed on the conference table in front of him. He was a little surprised. Livable is the most popular artificial synthetic board furniture in Paris recently. The price is very expensive. It is estimated that such a large conference table in front of him can only be bought for nearly 1,000 francs. Yes, at present, due to the fact that the production of casein glue has not been raised, synthetic board furniture is sold at a much higher price than solid wood furniture. However, under the gimmicks of anti-insect and non-deformation, coupled with Joseph's personal promotion before, synthetic board furniture has also become the current trend of high-end furniture. Goldmead lowered his head and sniffed the special smell of the table and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. What a charming smell. This is what they call industrial breath. If Joseph heard his inner voice, he would definitely tell him awkwardly that this was actually the smell of formaldehyde and that breathing too much would be bad for the body. Note 1. The ordinary school in Europe in the 18th century was roughly equivalent to today's middle school. Chapter 477. The power is in hand. In fact, all furniture produced by you will be accompanied by a notice: please place it in a ventilated place with a window open for use. But basically everyone will ignore it. Later, the valet brought Goldmead a bottle of Paris Coke and a glass of wine. The latter nodded to the valet and then skillfully poured the drink from the glass bottle into the wine glass. A large number of bubbles immediately began to bubble in the purple-black wine. This is also the most popular way of drinking among Parisian aristocrats these days. Soda drinks can increase the sweetness of wine, and the bubbles can help the wine aroma spread throughout the mouth faster. After drinking, the aroma of wine will return with the burping, which is simply an endless aftertaste. However, due to limited soda production capacity, Paris Coke is currently only sold in large cities in France, so this drinking method has not yet become popular throughout Europe. As far as Goldmead knew, the price of Paris Coke in the UK had been raised to 5 shillings, which is more than 6 francs a bottle. While he was indulging in sparkling wine, the door to the conference hall was pushed open again, and a short middle-aged man wearing a silk black short coat and a look of arrogance in his eyes stepped in. Next to him was a man with a pointed chin and a hooked nose. Everyone in the room immediately stood up and saluted the two of them. Viscount Ford, you look really good. We're all waiting for you. Viscount Fuld, isn't this Mr. Hope? Long time no see. Goldmead, also bowed hurriedly. He had heard about these two people who came, but this was the first time he saw their true appearance. Lienfeld is a French financial giant of Jewish origin. He owns banks and transportation companies, and is the behind-the-scenes controller of the French Taxpayers Federation. The one with the aquiline nose was a Dutchman named Henry Hope, who opened a large number of banks in the Netherlands, Russia, and Sweden. Legend has it that his net worth is greater than that of Fuld, but because he is a foreigner, his influence on the Tax Collectors Association is not as strong as the latter's. Fuld came to the head of the conference table and first politely asked Hope to sit down next to him. Then he looked at everyone present and said directly, "Everyone should have heard that the government has the right to take back tax farming rights plan. We invite everyone from all over the country to come to the gathering today to discuss how we should respond." Yes, the less than 20 people in this room are the plutocrats behind the scenes who control French taxation. Some of them don't even appear in the tax collectors meeting, but they support the tax collectors in front of the stage with their funds. A giant like Hope controls the tax revenue of several French provinces by himself, and at the same time, obtains huge profits from it. Immediately, a man with a saggy face waved his hands disdainfully. "There is no need to worry at all. Without our tax package, the French government will immediately go bankrupt." The old man next to him nodded immediately and said, "Even if there is no financial problem, the government's tax collectors will soon make His Majesty the King desperate. In the era of the Sun King, it was because of their outstanding corruption capabilities that the king gave us the tax. Now Louis, is there any solution for 16? The words of the two attracted a burst of agreement, but Hope coughed slightly and said seriously, "This matter is related to everyone's business. Since the Queen has this plan, she should have made preparations. We also need to advance in advance. Just deal with it." Fuld immediately responded, "First of all, we must form a financial alliance. No one can lend tax package money to the government in the form of loans." Everyone nodded, feeling that this move alone was enough to make the government give up on tax reform. Hope then continued, "We can also put pressure on the royal family through the bureaucracy." Fuld nodded in agreement. "Many people in the bureaucracy have invested in tax farming. If we give them some benefits, the whole country will be filled with voices of opposition." The fat man smiled sinisterly. "If the government wants to collect taxes on its own, it will definitely appoint a large number of tax officials. If necessary, it can send people to threaten them, or even kill a few to scare others." Hope didn't like his reckless approach. He looked at the wine glass in his hand and said, "If it really comes to that point, it would be better to kill the higher-ups instead of the tax collector." The people present immediately began to add details of various plans, showing confidence. 2 hours later, Fuld looked at the plan copied and compiled by the clerk, and couldn't help but nodded slightly. The people sitting here are all the smartest people in Europe, who control the situation in various countries. Whether it is the Queen or Brian's ministers, how can they be their opponents? French taxes will always belong to people like you. After the meeting, a group of financial giants went to the second floor to attend the banquet. Goldmead looked at Fuld's back, hesitating whether to speak out his idea, but felt that the current plan was already good. So he drank the wine in the glass and walked quickly towards the second floor Palace of Versailles. In the tea room of the Petit Trianon Palace, Queen Mary frowned and handed a thick stack of documents to Joseph, looking uneasy and saying, "My dear, the tax reform you planned just spread the word, and I have received this here. Much opposition." Joseph also frowned and looked through the documents, which were all objections to the abolition of the tax farming system from officials at all levels. Most of them were local officials, but also included 2 governors and assistant ministers of justice. Even the king's brother, the Duke of Provence, was explicitly opposed. Joseph roughly counted more than 40 remonstrances in total. He was not surprised. After all, many officials had invested in tax farmers. If their interests were affected, they would naturally oppose it desperately. Queen Mary continued, "I heard that more advice is being sent to the Palace of Versailles. Perhaps it is really not appropriate to reform the tax system now." When she heard her son say that he wanted to change the tax system, she agreed without much hesitation. After all, ministers such as Brian and Mirabeau also agreed. But now that so many officials have expressed opposition, she can't help but wonder if her son has really made a mistake. Joseph took a deep breath and gave the queen a confident smile. Dear mother, give me a few more months. I will definitely let you see satisfactory results. Okay, then you try again. Queen Mary nodded. She now trusts her son very much, and then took Joseph's arm. Have dinner with me today. Oh, it seems that Alexandra will come too. Ah, okay. Joseph nodded absent-mindedly, but in his mind he was thinking about how to deal with so many officials who oppose the abolition of tax farmers. Should we try to reduce their losses first? Joseph walked along the corridor, and the nobles on both sides stepped aside and bowed to him, and the queen he suddenly narrowed his eyes. Yes, he now holds administrative, judicial, and financial powers. Why should he consider the interests of those little people? Chapter 478 Strike a heavy blow. The next morning Mera straightened his clothes, pushed the door open at the signal of Emmanuel, saluted the crown prince sitting at the table, and said concisely, Your Highness, I'm here. Joseph smiled and stood up. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Mera. Do you have any instructions for me to come? Joseph was used to his attitude towards the royal family. He signaled him to sit on the sofa and nodded. There are indeed some things you need to do. He sat opposite Mera and handed him a list. These officials may be involved in corruption. Please investigate them. The list was exactly the more than 40 officials who had previously expressed opposition to the abolition of the tax farmer system. The bureaucracy should have been a tool for the royal family to manage the country, but some people dared to openly sing against the royal family. Joseph has decided that this wave will be a heavy blow to help these guys put themselves in their place. And to deal with bureaucrats, the Fair Investigation Bureau is undoubtedly the best knife. Merit's eyes swept across the list and then looked at Joseph and said, Your Highness, is there any evidence of their corruption? Not yet, so someone reported them. No. Mera put the list down, frowned and said solemnly, Your Highness, then please forgive me for rejecting your request. The Fair Investigation Office is used to supervise the ethics of officials and safeguard the rights and interests of the people, not a tool for you to achieve your political goals. Joseph was immediately confused. Merit and his people are indeed dedicated and fearless of power and wealth, and they are also very capable, but they are too stubborn and don't even sell their own face. However, this is a necessary quality for the anti-corruption department. Although he is very sure that these officials on the list can jump out at the same time to oppose the abolition of tax farmers, it would be strange if they didn't receive money behind the scenes. However, he could only helplessly say, Mr. Marat, I just asked you to investigate. If they are innocent, then naturally nothing will happen to them. He thought to himself that with all the current French bureaucrats, if they were all convicted of corruption without investigation or trial, there would probably not be many unjust cases. Merit frowned again, looking like he was going against his will, and lowered his head and said, Okay, Your Highness, I will send someone to check. Do you have anything else to do? That's it, that's all. Merit then picked up the list, touched his chest to signal Joseph, took a few steps back, turned around and left, still muttering in a low voice, It's really a waste of the bureau's energy. Not long after Merit left, Brian came in again and handed a stack of letters to Joseph, anxiously saying, Your Highness, these are the remonstrances that were just delivered yesterday. They are all from officials from all over the country who expressed their opposition to tax reform. Joseph glanced at the letters in his hand, at least more than 20, and immediately frowned. Brian was well aware of the Crown Prince's determination to abolish the tax farmers this time, and said solemnly, Your Highness, there should be more advice on the way to the Palace of Versailles. With so much opposition now, tax reform may not be implemented too quickly. Joseph knew that he was right. Now there are officials from almost all over the country who oppose tax reform. If he pushes forward against so many objections, it will inevitably cause a backlash from the entire bureaucracy. He couldn't help but take a deep breath. He didn't expect that the tax farmer group was so powerful that it could motivate so many officials to work for them. But the more this is the case, the more we must completely eradicate this force. The current priority is to stop the bureaucrats' momentum against tax reform. Otherwise, the more officials join the opposition group, the more difficult it will be. Originally, when Merit solved the first batch of officials who jumped out to oppose, and others, seeing that the situation is not right, will most likely not dare to accept the money of the tax farmer group to speak for them. But there will be a time lag in between. Once the officials' remonstrances are sent to the Palace of Versailles, it means that they can no longer turn back and must grit their teeth and oppose to the end. Of course, when it is absolutely necessary, he can directly dismiss a large number of officials and force the abolition of the tax farmer system, but that will also bring huge political turmoil. At that time, it is very likely that the royal family will form a situation of versus the entire bureaucracy, which is definitely not what he wants. Joseph's eyes swept over the letter in his hand, and suddenly his heart moved. The sign that these officials participated in opposing tax reform is these remonstrances. In other words, if there were no such remonstrances, they would still be neutral. Once they find that the momentum is not right, they can immediately turn to the royal family again. He immediately said to Emin, "Please ask the postal director Viscount Eraut and Mr. Fouch to see me. Oh, and the head of the intelligence bureau's blackroom department." The blackroom is the department in the intelligence system responsible for monitoring mail. Emin hurriedly bowed and said, "It's Mr. Jane Landau, Your Highness." "Yes, please ask him to come too." "Yes, Your Highness." 2 hours later, the postal director and 2 senior officials of the intelligence bureau hurried to the Palace of Versailles. After the 3 of them saluted, Joseph immediately instructed the postal director Viscount Eraut, "I need you to immediately cause some accidents in the postal system, the kind that can cause the postal system to partially collapse. You don't have to worry about being punished for this. I will transfer you to another department afterwards, and it will be higher than your current position." Eraut was promoted by him from the bottom, and his loyalty is absolutely reliable. Eraut widened his eyes in surprise, but still responded, "Yes, Your Highness." But, before he had time to ask in detail, the prince said to Fouche, "Let the blackroom inspect all the letters sent by officials to the Palace of Versailles recently. Any letters involving tax reform should be seized or sent back to the place of origin by the post office." Fouche and Jane Landau looked at each other and hurriedly bowed and said, "Yes, Your Highness." That night, a fire broke out in the office building of the Paris post office. The fire was quickly brought under control, only burning 2 offices and warehouses on the 3rd floor. There were no casualties, but some letters turned to ashes in the fire. As the news was published, the 2 main leaders of the post office began to attack each other on the matter. Both of them showed an attitude of unwillingness to take responsibility and took the case to the chief minister Brian. Immediately, the postal director Eraut was seriously ill and took leave, and the officials of the entire postal system were divided into 2 factions, supporting the 2 superiors respectively. For a time, the postal system was in a state of disarray, and no one cared about daily mail delivery. A large number of letters were piled up or sent back to where they were sent. However, if someone in the postal system carefully observed, they would find that ordinary mail could basically be delivered normally, but official letters were the most affected. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 479 Merit's Fighting Power. In the western suburbs of Paris, in an office at the headquarters of the Notary Investigation Bureau, Joseph looked at Desmoulins in front of him, glanced at the work report he had just brought, and said casually, "Is Mr. Merit not here?" Yes, Your Highness." Desmoulins, the second in command of the Investigation Bureau, said, He went to Poitou the day before yesterday." Joseph remembered that the governor of Poitou, the Earl of Norfolk, was one of the 2 governors who opposed the abolition of the tax farmer system, and nodded slightly. "Did he go to investigate the Earl of Norfolk?" No. Desmoulins shook his head and said, It's about the Water Conservancy Construction Department, embezzlement of repair fees. Joseph frowned, then flipped through the work report of the Investigation Bureau in his hand, and asked, "Has Mr. Merit arranged a lot of new investigation tasks recently?" Yes, Your Highness." Desmoulins helped him turn to the last few pages, and there were indeed many investigation plans. But when Joseph glanced over, his brows furrowed even deeper. Most of these investigation tasks only had one investigator assigned, and the deadline was 5 to 8 days. What could be found out with so few people and time? Fuck. Joseph realized that Merritt was just playing me. He didn't investigate seriously at all. Joseph was a little annoyed. If the Intelligence Bureau was not as efficient as the Notary Investigation Bureau in investigating corruption, and if the intelligence personnel investigating officials would cause criticism from officials, he really wanted to hand the matter over to Fauci. He was about to reprimand Desmoulins, but suddenly remembered that doing so might have a counter effect on the Jacobins. He sighed and got up to leave. It seems that we have to give Mr. Merritt some strength. Joseph got on the carriage, thought about it, and said to Emmanuel, "Go to the Intelligence Bureau." "Yes, Your Highness." Bourges, South Central France. Céciline, the second-class investigator of the Notary Investigation Bureau, was bored and flipping through the municipal revenue and expenditure accounts, and he couldn't help yawning. As Mr. Merritt said, there was nothing wrong with the municipal commissioner Baron Bassand and the municipal financial officer Mr. Comal. This investigation was just a sad political manipulation. The accounts were very clean. Céciline also checked the bank accounts of the two people in the past few days and visited some officials who were familiar with them. There were no problems. That's it. He closed the account book and stood up. "I can go back to Paris in 2 days. This time it's like a vacation." He left the city hall and was about to call a carriage. Suddenly, a sturdy man with a hat brim pulled down very low rushed out from the left corner and bumped into him. "Hey, you walk so elegantly," Céciline protested loudly to the man, but the latter seemed not to hear it and lowered his head and disappeared into the pedestrians. When Céciline returned to the hotel and was about to take out the key to open the door, his fingertips touched a piece of paper in his pocket. He remembered that he had never put anything like this in his pocket, so he took it out and checked it. He saw only 2 paragraphs on it. "Go back to Paris. There is nothing you want to check here. It's still time to leave now. If you continue, you will definitely encounter an accident." Céciline's face flushed immediately. He was an investigator personally selected by Merritt. His character and values were standard Jacobins. He gritted his teeth and growled, "Shameless guy, do you think you can scare me like this? For the benefit of the people, I must make your dirty deeds public." He tore up the note, went into the house, and wrote a letter to the Investigation Bureau. The main content was that he felt that there should be serious problems in Bourges and needed to extend the investigation time. "Please ask your superiors for approval." Then he went out again, thought about it, and followed the skills that Mr. Merritt taught him before, and went straight to the residence of the most famous reporter in Bourges. The man who bumped into him outside the city hall smiled when he saw him leaving. That night, he wrote a letter to his superiors in the intelligence agency to report that the ignition plan was going smoothly. At the same time, investigators in various parts of France who were responsible for investigating the more than 40 officials also encountered various situations. Some people were threatened with knives by bandits and asked to stop investigating. Some people were robbed and all the investigation materials they collected were stolen. Some people watched the documents they wanted to read being burned. Soon, these investigators who were as stubborn as Merritt were furious. They used to think that these officials were innocent and were just victims of political struggles, but now it seems that none of them are clean. They have not investigated much on their side, but they are guilty. First point, if they don't get to the bottom of it, how can they give justice to the French people? Of course, these threats and other things were specially arranged by Fauci's agents according to the instructions of the Crown Prince. They are not good at investigating corruption, but they are familiar with these things. Merritt, who was conducting an investigation in Poitou, received a large number of investigation applications within a few days. When he saw what happened to his men, he was also furious. He immediately wrote to Desmoulins, instructing him to send more people to assist the threatened investigators, even if he had to suspend some unimportant tasks, and to thoroughly investigate the officials involved. The entire Notary Investigation Bureau suddenly entered a mad state. More than half a month later, Versailles Palace. Merritt stood in front of the Crown Prince with a guilty look on his face, blaming himself. "Your Highness, I misunderstood you before. Please accept my sincere apology. As you expected, those officials did have problems. I never blamed you. Facts have proved that your work is as good as ever." Joseph smiled and turned over the report sent by Marat. In less than 20 days, this piranha fighter had beaten out 16 officials' solid evidence of crime, mainly corruption, in addition to abuse of power for personal gain, collusion between officials and businessmen, smuggling, and even a murder case. Joseph had a feeling for a while, should Marat be allowed to manage the intelligence bureau? The efficiency of the clues would definitely make Flourishes men ashamed. However, he immediately gave up the idea. The intelligence bureau needs to do a lot of dirty work, and with Marat's character, there is no need to expect him to do it. Only people like Flourishes will execute any of his orders without hesitation. Joseph raised the 16 reports and said to Marat in a deep voice, "Please handle these termites and vampires impartially. The Notary Investigation Bureau has the power to arrest directly, and the detention time without evidence is even longer than that of the police. After the evidence is finalized, you only need to submit an application to Joseph, and after approval, you can directly initiate public prosecution." "Yes, Your Highness." Joseph nodded with satisfaction, and then looked at the investigation reports of the remaining 30 officials who had not yet obtained conclusive evidence, and couldn't help but frown slightly. Chapter 480, Crime of Huge Assets of Unknown Origin. Marat glanced at the expression of the Crown Prince, then glanced at the investigation report in his hand, and immediately said, "Your Highness, please give me some time. If they really have embezzled, I will definitely find out." Joseph's brows were still not relaxed after hearing this. He believed that with Marat's perseverance spirit, he would sooner or later find out the handles of those officials. He even found evidence of the corruption of the governor of Poitou, but it would take too long. If the officials who dared to oppose the abolition of the tax farmer system could not be deterred in the shortest time, more people would follow suit and join the ranks of those who were singing against themselves for money. After all, no matter how collapsed the postal system was, it would only be chaotic for a month at most, so it was necessary to cut the Gordian knot and convict all these 40 people. For a moment, Joseph's mind flashed the idea of asking the intelligence bureau to fabricate evidence for these people. However, he immediately rejected this idea. Once this precedent is set, it will cause endless harm in the future. Maybe one day the intelligence department will be able to fabricate evidence to pin the crime on the royal family. It is better to follow the recognized political rules to avoid serious side effects. Joseph subconsciously flipped through the investigation report in his hand and suddenly noticed that it said that the total assets of an official in a southern province were 50,000 francs. And his position was just a judicial assistant in the city hall. The monthly salary should not exceed 60 francs, and there was no title of fief in the family, and obviously there was no industry. In other words, if this guy did not have improper income, he would have to work for 70 years without eating or drinking to save up this family fortune. And he took office 9 years ago, and Montauban, where he served, was still a very poor province. Joseph turned to the next page. This is the municipal commissioner of Poitiers, with an assets of more than 120,000 francs. He does have a manor at home, but it can only produce about 2,500 francs a year. This manor was bought by his father 17 years ago, and it is far from contributing this huge fortune to him. The situation of more than a dozen people in succession was similar. They all had a lot of wealth, but they didn't have any property that could make so much money. Joseph couldn't help but narrow his eyes. The report was all the information that the investigators could find in a short time, so the officials' actual assets should be more than this number. A word immediately emerged in his mind: the crime of huge assets of unknown origin. Although it was not realistic to make this crime into a law in the 18th century, and the legislative process was too time consuming, it did not prevent the concept from being used in investigating the evidence of officials. The Fair Investigation Office has the right to interrogate, and Marat has never liked bureaucrats. As long as there is a handle, he will definitely not be soft in the trial. Joseph immediately smiled and looked at Marat. "Mr. Marat, have you heard of the crime of huge assets of unknown origin?" "Ah, Poitiers. City Point in an office of the Notary Investigation Bureau, Municipal Commissioner Baron Caston glared at the two black-clad investigators in front of him angrily, clenched his fist and said, "You dare to summon me without any evidence? I will definitely accuse you to Her Majesty the Queen. Please, please, don't be nervous." Desmoulins looked at him calmly. We are just chatting with you. As for accusation, that is your right. The Investigation Bureau has been very busy recently, and as the second in command of the Bureau, he also has to personally participate in the interrogation work. He probably felt that his speaking efficiency was too low, so he winked at the assistant beside him and stepped aside. The latter immediately took out a document and said to Baron Caston in a deep voice, "Your property exceeds 120,000 francs, right? What does this have to do with you?" Desmoulins' assistant seemed to be talking to himself. "You have served as assistant to the financial officer and trade commissioner before, and were promoted to municipal commissioner 4 years ago. We have calculated that all your salaries over the years add up to 7,820 francs. Caston said disdainfully. "So what? Since the purchase of your manor, the total income should be 37,000 francs. You rented out your property in the east of the city, and the rent has totaled 4,000 francs over the years. You have written articles for Life and Salon, and the total royalties are, your wife and children have no income. Your wife brought a dowry of 2,000 francs that year. Do you think I missed anything?" Caston just sneered, as if he was too lazy to pay attention to him. "So, your total income, since you were born, is 51,000 francs. Desmoulins' assistant read the information mechanically, "and your family's living expenses, including the purchase of the property you live in now, daily food and clothing, club expenses, and at least 18,000 francs. That is to say, your assets should be 33,000 francs. And the property under your name exceeds 120,000 francs. He suddenly leaned close to Castor, his nose almost touching the latter's face. "So, where did the extra 87,000 francs come from?" Extra. Castor was immediately stunned by the question, because he had never heard of such an interrogation. He became a little nervous. "It's the inheritance my father left me." "You are lying. Your inheritance tax totaled 720 livres, which means that you inherited less than 10,000 livres. Oh, I remember. I invested in my friend's business and got dividends. Okay, what's his name, where does he live, and what business does he do?" Caston couldn't make up a story, and finally gritted his teeth and said, "I'm rich. So what? Those were all given to me by friends who admire me." Desmoulins, on the side, suddenly smiled. "Who gave you the money?" "It's none of your business." "Of course it's my business," Desmoulins said loudly. "Giving money to an official for no reason, this is bribery." Caston was interrogated for 2 days and 2 nights. Then, Desmoulins applied to the High Court for an extension of 2 days. Joseph had already instructed the court through the Royal Supreme Court, so all such applications were quickly approved. Although Caston was a nobleman, the Jacobin investigators disliked nobles the most, so except for not beating him directly, they used all means such as intimidation, and not letting him sleep. Finally, on the afternoon of the second day, Caston couldn't stand it anymore, and began to confess the process of corruption. Many movies and TV dramas show criminals with strong psychological qualities who always deny their crimes when being interrogated. But in reality, most people can't even last half a day in an interrogation room before their psychological defenses collapse. Especially when Desmoulins was obsessed with the question of source of property, Caston couldn't fool him. At the same time, similar situations were happening all over France. The investigators of the Notarial Investigation Bureau reaped a great harvest. Chapter 481 The wind direction reverses. Baron Gachin, Assistant Municipal Commissioner of Keene City, squeezed the newspaper in his hand hard. The weather in France was still quite cold in mid-April, but there were fine beads of sweat oozing out from his forehead. The headline on the front page of the newspaper was "The Notarial Investigation Bureau launched an operation and found more than 40 senior officials involved in corruption." He saw in the news that top executives including the governor of Poitou and the Poitiers municipal commissioner had been arrested. The second and third pages of the newspaper were devoted to their corruption point, since these 40-odd people were all high-ranking officials, with the lowest position being a judicial assistant at the city hall, equivalent to the deputy mayor, and officials with lower positions were not qualified to make remonstrances to the Palace of Versailles. The shock caused was very great. And the whole country was everyone is paying attention to this matter. What made Gashen nervous was not the positions of these people, but what they had in common. He had already inquired through his own bureaucratic circle that more than 40 people had expressed their opposition to the abolition of the tax farming system to the Palace of Versailles. It can't be such a coincidence, so obviously these people's corruption will be exposed, and it will be the royal family's punishment for them. It seems that the royal family is very determined to carry out tax reform this time, and they are not willing to even solve the governor. Baron Gashen thought of the remonstrance he sent to the Palace of Versailles half a month ago, and suddenly felt cold all over. He received 8,000 francs from the tax collector Eurides, and promised to make suggestions to the government on his behalf, opposing the abolition of the tax collector system. He thought it was just a simple remonstrance, something he had done many times before, especially when the Duke of Orleans was still alive. He opposed everything from tax reform to Necker's arrest, and there was never any problem. I didn't expect that it would turn out like this time. More than 40 officials were arrested. Gashen slammed the newspaper to the ground, stood up suddenly, and ordered the manservant to go out. But is not clean either. It should be said that no official's butt is clean. When the Notary Investigation Bureau comes to visit, he will probably not only lose his official position, but even go to jail. Therefore, we must find ways to deal with this matter as soon as possible. The only way he could think of was to join forces with other officials who oppose tax reform, to make the situation even bigger. As long as there are enough people involved, and the voice is loud enough, even if the royal family is dissatisfied, it is impossible to punish so many officials at once. Damn Eurydice, he cursed, and just as he was about to go out, he saw the butler coming quickly, and placing a letter in his hand. Sir, this was just returned from Paris. It seems there is something wrong with the postal system there. Gashen was startled. Isn't this his own remonstrance against the tax reform? He quickly opened the envelope and saw that the letter inside was still there, and he suddenly felt ecstatic. Now he is no longer an anti-reformist, and the Notary Investigation Bureau will not come to him. He came to the fireplace as quickly as possible and threw the letter on the fire. He thought for a moment, then immediately returned to his study, picked up a pen, and wrote a letter fully supporting the abolition of the tax farming system, and asked the butler to send it to the Palace of Versailles. The attitude of the royal family is already very clear, and you would be a fool not to take sides at this time. In comparison, the little benefit of the tax collector is far less important than keeping his official position. In a luxurious villa in the southern suburbs of Paris, Fuld was looking relaxed and discussing the amount of tax for next year with several big tycoons from the Tax Collectors Association. Since last year, the sales of goods to Germany and the Mediterranean coast have increased significantly. I estimate that the total tax revenue this year will increase by about 70 million francs. Thank you. X rubbed the wine glass in his hand. The government will definitely require us to increase the tax package. I suggest that next year's tax package be increased by 30 million francs. Hope immediately shook his head. You are really too generous. We have to go to Luxembourg and the southern Netherlands to collect taxes, and the cost will increase significantly. The tax package will increase by up to 10 million francs. Fuld smiled and said, as long as we lower this year's tax account, how will the Chancellor of Finance know the increase in tax revenue? Therefore, the tax package we proposed for negotiation should remain unchanged, and at most increase. As he was talking, he saw his confidant butler knocking on the door and entering, and he suddenly felt unhappy. Mr. Chauffoy, what's the emergency? Yes, sir. Look at this. The butler handed him the latest Paris business journal. Fuld only glanced at the title, then his expression changed drastically, and he snatched the newspaper away. The Austrian cousin was so bold that he arrested more than 40 officials who opposed the tax reform. He handed the newspaper to Hope. We have to do something quickly. The officials who were arrested all took their money. Although it was only their subordinates who sent the money, it was safer to make some preparations in advance. Hope was also a little surprised that the Notary Investigation Bureau found evidence of corruption by so many people so quickly, but he soon smiled. Don't worry, there are only about 40 people. We have invested more than 1 million francs in this matter, and there will be more criticisms piled on Her Majesty the Queen's desk later. Could she still send hundreds of officials to prison? It would be great if she really did this. Fancuix also laughed. That would make the entire French bureaucracy come to our side. Fult asked worriedly, should we increase some funds to allow more officials to participate? Your advice is helpful. After a brief discussion, a few people decided to use another 200,000 francs to bribe officials to make the matter even bigger. However, that afternoon, their insider in the Palace of Versailles sent a message saying that the Queen had received only more than 40 letters of admonition. Later, due to an accident in the postal system, some letters were burned in the warehouse, and more were sent back to the place where they were sent. Hope and others looked at each other in surprise. How could such a coincidence happen? In this way, the group opposing tax reform would be limited to more than 40 people, and the officials behind would definitely cut ties with them immediately. Sure enough, soon the officials who had received their money before quietly returned the money, and the people they sent to bribe the officials were all turned away without surprise, and some were even beaten by officials pretending to be honest. A few days later, the insider of the Palace of Versailles sent another message saying that officials from all over the country began to express their support for tax reform, especially those who had received their money before, who were extremely active. Soon after, the headlines of tax reform is widely supported. Tax abuses will be corrected appeared in newspapers in Paris. The articles listed the officials who expressed their support for the reform, followed by their words praising the tax reform. Soon, more officials followed suit. For a time, supporting tax reform almost became politically correct for French bureaucrats. On the other hand, the bosses behind the General Association of Tax Farmers hurriedly convened a meeting. Chapter 480 Avoidance and Submission. 2 days later, 9 plutocrats who control the French Tax Owners Federation gathered in Fult's villa. Only these people from around Paris came because of the emergency. However, they always have more than 40% of the funds, which is enough to make decisions on major matters at the conference table. Fancuix flipped through the newspaper and saw articles such as Professor Nissoi said that the tax collector system has increased the amount of taxes paid by ordinary people. Shocked, they will not allow you to reduce taxes. It is the tax system failure, or the darkness of human nature, and so on. He immediately slammed the table in anger. These articles exposing the shortcomings of the tax collector system and analyzing the ability of tax reform to reduce the amount of taxes paid by the people were all written by Joseph. Tax reform is beneficial to both the country and the people, but only detrimental to tax collectors. Naturally, he will use public opinion to publicize it. Fult signaled everyone to be quiet and said with a sullen face, the damn General Post Office is on fire, so that makes things a little bit worse for us. Everyone was silent. They previously spent millions of francs in an attempt to use the power of officials to put pressure on the royal family. Unexpectedly, the entire bureaucracy has now become the biggest supporter of tax reform. Maybe they don't really support it, but the direction of public opinion has taken shape. Hope coughed slightly and said, first of all, everyone must ask all subordinates who have been in contact with the arrested officials to leave the country immediately. Those officials will report them at any time. Several people nodded. Don't worry, they won't be caught. I've asked them to leave. Linda said nervously, I think the royal family is very determined to cancel the tax package this time. If the government raises enough funds, it will not renew the tax package agreement next year. Hope raised his hand and interrupted him. Given the financial situation of the French government, it is unlikely that they can get 200 million francs. Of course, we cannot take it lightly. He looked at Fult. We should give the government some illusions to paralyze them and make them relax about fundraising. What do you mean? On the one hand, let Viscount Bertrand lower the conditions in the tax package negotiations, such as increasing the total tax package by 70 million francs compared with this year, and giving up taxes that the government cares about, such as transportation taxes and transit taxes. In short, let the royal family. The idea is that, even if the tax package is abolished, it will not be better than this condition. Viscount Bertrand was the negotiator of the Tax Collectors Association. Although it is only April, negotiations on the tax package amount for next year have already begun, and usually it takes until the end of the year to sign a contract. Hope continued. If necessary, we can even get Viscount Bertrand and Brian to sign an agreement of intent. At the end of the year, there will always be excuses to revoke his status as a negotiator and replace him with someone else to renegotiate. When everyone heard this, their eyes suddenly lit up, and they all nodded in praise. Although the head of the Tax Owners Association is Viscount Fuld, most of the important decisions are made under the guidance of the wily Hope. Mr. Charles Hope looked at the old man in front of him again, and then gestured to the three people beside him. On the other hand, you and Baron Morel went to secretly contact Brian, saying that you can bypass General Assembly, privately provided loans totaling 150 million francs to the French government. Of course, you have to show that you care about the interest and additional conditions and delay the negotiations until the end of the year. As long as October passes, the initiative will return to our side. By then, it will be too late for the French government to raise more funds for next year's fiscal expenditure. They can only agree to let us continue to cover taxes. A smile flashed in Charles's eyes, and he immediately leaned forward and said, "Please leave this matter to me." In the office on the second floor of the Tuileries Palace. Brian said with a cheerful expression, "Your Highness, the Tax Owners Association has obviously felt the pressure from the authorities and has taken a very low profile in tax negotiations. I heard from Viscount Bertrand's assistant that their tax package bottom line is likely to reach 540 million francs, and they can even return some taxes related to industry and trade to the government." Joseph also smiled. "Well, if that's the case, they are indeed sincere." Brian leaned forward again and said mysteriously, "Your Highness, Charles, Baron Morel and others came to me yesterday afternoon, suggesting that if the government abolishes the tax farming system, they can provide a large number of loans. But they want 18% interest, but I feel there should be room for negotiation." "Very good. This way we will be more confident about the tax reform." Joseph looked very happy. "Please continue to negotiate with them and strive to get the best conditions." "Yes, Your Highness, I will definitely bring you good news." After Brian left, Joseph immediately signaled to Eamon, "Please prepare the carriage, we will go to the Paris Police Academy." He didn't have any hope for Brian's so-called negotiation. He knew very well that what he wanted to do was to destroy the jobs of tax collectors. How could those people compromise? Especially since there is Jewish capital here. He knows very well what those people have done in history and the devastating impact it has had on the economy of the host country. He will never give up any benefit. Therefore, the current posture of the tax collectors can only have one purpose, and that is to delay time. Firstly, it is to delay the current political trend that strongly calls for the abolition of tax farming. Secondly, it should shorten the government's preparation time and shake the government's determination. Joseph got on the carriage with a smile on his face. Delaying time. Great. I just wanted to delay time. If the tax farmer could focus on the negotiation with Brian and avoid the more than 40 senior officials opposing tax reform, he would have fewer worries and devote more energy to the preparations for tax reform. This is destined to be a world where only Brian is hurt. Both sides are pretending to be good, and only he thinks he is doing something important for the future of the country and is working hard. Not long after, Joseph's car stopped in the open space outside the Paris Police Academy. Because they were not notified in advance, officials such as Riant did not come out to greet them. Joseph did not go to the main campus, but turned directly into the newly built School of Economics on the south side of the police academy. It was not until he saw the tax collectors training on the playground that the dean here, Clermont, hurriedly led people to greet them. "It is an honor for you to visit the School of Economics, Your Royal Highness." Clermont bowed and then signaled to the school officials beside him, "Let the students gather to welcome your highness." "Oh, don't disturb everyone's class." Joseph hurriedly stopped him. "I just came to see how the school is running." Chapter 483. Take advantage of every opportunity. Clermont gestured to the two-story building not far away. "Your highness, Baron Friant has converted a warehouse into a teaching building. The ground nearby has been leveled before, so it can be used directly as a playground." He led Joseph to the students who were training. As for the teachers, the Dean of Academic Affairs invited some professors of economics and mathematics from the University of Paris, and transferred teachers from the police academy. There are currently 34 teachers in the academy. He rubbed his hands and said, "This is indeed too few compared to 620 students, but if the teaching time is staggered, it can be maintained." 620 people. Joseph was a little surprised when he heard this. The School of Economics has only been preparing for more than a month, and Friant can call so many students. "Yes, your highness. The dean of the academy has transferred more than 300 police academy students who have studied mathematics. Oh, and Mr. Robespierre, the lawyer, has also brought more than 30 people." Joseph nodded. Robespierre still has some reputation in the legal community. It is estimated that he brought some Jacobin believers. This is quite good. Jacobins are energetic, and this kind of people is needed to promote tax reform. Point on the playground. Students in black uniforms are practicing fighting, swinging short sticks in their hands. Not long after, several instructors summarized the training situation, and then announced a 15-minute break before shooting training. Point yes, according to Joseph's requirements, these tax collectors spend more than half of their time learning about detection, cues, fighting, shooting and other content. Point after graduation, they will become the core force of tax bureaus in various places. Calculating tax rates and preparing reports can be done by recruiting clerks, while tax collectors are more responsible for leading people to investigate tax evasion and tax collection, and they must have strong enough combat power. The tax system had limited manpower in the early stage. The School of Economics should be able to recruit 2 classes and train about 1,500 graduates. So one person can only do the work of several people. When the manpower is sufficient, Joseph is going to split the tax police department from it, and these tax collectors who have undergone police training can directly serve as commanders of the tax police. Point as usual, Joseph had lunch with the students of the School of Economics at lunchtime. Point sitting at the table on his left, Robespierre watched His Royal Highness the Dauphin eat the same food as himself and the students, and talked about the significance of tax reform without any airs, and an idea that he had never had before came to his mind. Point perhaps the king can also lead the people to a better life. He shook his head vigorously. He immediately denied this idea as he admired Rousseau's thoughts. No, autocracy cannot produce a rational kingdom. However, he immediately thought that if there was no crown prince, the clean and fair tax system he was trying to create would not have appeared so quickly. Point even a government authorized by the people would probably find it difficult to build such a reasonable tax system. What is better? Unconsciously, the persistence in his heart had cracked. Point Joseph had no idea of the struggle in Robespierre's heart. After giving a brief speech to encourage the students of the School of Economics as the principal, he rushed to the National First Prison 2 kilometers away. Point well, now the Bastille has been changed into a financial center, so there are no large prisons in Paris, and most criminals are now imprisoned here. Point moreover, the first prison is close to the Paris Police Academy, which can greatly improve security. There is no need for so many soldiers to garrison as before, and it can save a lot of money. Point not long after, Joseph walked into the first prison under the leadership of the Marquis d'Aulnay, the commander-in-chief of the prison. Point there are only more than 10 buildings here. The main part is a prison surrounded by a wall more than 10 meters high. It can accommodate about 300 or 400 prisoners. However, the bottom is reinforced with granite. The difficulty of escaping the prison is not much lower than that of the Bastille. Point in fact, the Bastille is empty most of the time. It was a huge waste to build such a large piece of land in a valuable area near the city center. It was also particularly disgusting to the citizens. It should have been moved out of the city long ago. Point in a stone interrogation room on the 3rd floor of the prison, Joseph met the main person of this trip, the Earl of Norfolk. The governor of Poitou, the highest ranking official among the more than 40 officials sent to prison by the Bureau of Justice investigation this time, the Earl of Norfolk, with disheveled hair and haggard face, saw that it was the Crown Prince who came. He saluted excitedly and said a lot of blessings and greetings first, and then began to cry that he had made a mistake and was sorry for the trust of His Majesty the King, but begged His Majesty to grant him amnesty. That's right. According to current French law, the King can pardon anyone with just a signature. This person thought that the Queen had sent the Crown Prince to reprimand him and then pardon him. Joseph ignored him and turned to the Marquis of Launay and said, "I just passed by the noble prison and saw that the furnishings inside were too luxurious. Now the country's finances are tight, so except for tables and beds, we should save on everything. Oh, it's better to change the cells into single rooms, so that it will be more conducive for prisoners to concentrate on reflection. Yes, Your Highness, I will follow your instructions." Norfolk's face was about to turn green. He was almost going crazy in the 3-bedroom cell he was living in for the past few days. If it was changed to a single room and all the furniture and leisure items were removed, what would be the difference between it and hell? He watched the Crown Prince signal the Marquis of Launay and all the jailers to go out, and then sat down opposite him and said tremblingly, Your Highness, are you going to, although your case has not yet been heard, I can be sure that at least you will be exiled to Lorraine. Joseph glanced at him and said indifferently, but it is more likely to go to Tripoli. No, I don't want to go there. Please help me plead with His Majesty, please. Joseph raised his hand to interrupt him. If you show a repentant attitude, I can consider pleading for you. Repent? Yes, repent. I will confess to God every day, from morning to night, I swear. No, you are wrong. You need to repent with practical actions. Joseph picked up the teacup in front of him, as if he was smelling the tea. For example, expose some of your accomplices, or the criminal facts you know. This is likely to keep you away from North Africa. Norfolk was startled and said carefully, Your Highness, what do you want to know? Everything. Joseph motioned to Eamon to give him paper and pen. The higher the official position, the better. This time there are so many officials involved in the corruption case. The commotion is so big, and he has spent so much energy to deal with it. Naturally he will not waste the current situation while the heat of the matter is still there. Starting with these arrested officials, he began to implement the administrative reform that he has been thinking about for a long time, so as not to waste this opportunity. Chapter 484 Royal University of Administration of France. The sky gradually darkened. The carriage of the Crown Prince finally left the first prison of France. Joseph sat in the car, looking at the list of more than 30 officials in his hand, smiled, and threw it to Eamon. Please put it in the storage cabinet in the study for me. Yes, Your Highness. Joseph did not want this list to purge officials at all although the people on the list were involved in corruption and dereliction of duty. They did not stand up to oppose tax reform. At least it is not appropriate to touch them for now. Politics is like this. The scope of the attack must be concentrated so that officials know whether they are safe. In this way, those who are not involved will draw a clear line with the target of the attack and support the royal family. If political purges spread indefinitely, officials will be panicked and will inevitably use various means to protect themselves, which may eventually lead to political turmoil. However, it is completely possible to use this list to hit the bureaucrats. If you don't hit these bigwigs who are domineering, they will easily forget who they are and who is the boss the next day. Joseph brought Fouché to the first prison again. He personally visited an assistant governor who was captured by merit. Fouché followed his instructions and went to the cell of Municipal Commissioner Caston. Joseph's energy was limited, so he could only take care of officials at the provincial level. The rest of the small shrimps were thrown to the intelligence bureau to deal with, especially since many officials involved in the case had not been sent to Paris, and he could not run around the country for such a small matter. Joseph estimated that, after threatening all the more than 40 officials, he could probably get the revelations of thousands of officials at present. France has only more than 10,000 officials, not counting North Africa and Luxembourg. The number of people he got was enough to start the reform of the civil service. Joseph looked at the assistant governor of Picardy who was busy writing the revelations, and silently planned in his heart. First, the officials had to be nervous. Then, the royal family would act as a savior and save them at the critical moment. These gentlemen who have been blessed will certainly not refuse to go to university to learn professional knowledge in order to improve their business capabilities, to repay His Majesty the King. Joseph knew that the French bureaucracy had been running for too many years and had a very strong inherent inertia. If he copied the public examination system of North Africa, it would most likely cause strong opposition from the entire bureaucracy and even the nobles. So, he could only change the mode to operate. That is to set up a royal university of French administration with the king as the president, and let a large number of high-ranking officials enter the school for further study. In this way, in the future, academic officials will gradually begin to exclude colleagues from wild backgrounds, forcing the latter to seek to enter the school for further study. At this time, the entrance examination can be started. Those who cannot pass the entrance examination, the academic colleagues will marginalize you without the royal family's intervention. After that, it gradually evolved into people without a diploma from the University of Administration and Management, and they would not even think about entering the officialdom. Eventually, even low-level positions such as clerks, secretaries, and data clerks were all included in the scope of university studies at that time. The entrance examination of the administrative university had already become the civil service examination in France. Unknowingly, the most important step of the reform of the civil service was completed. The biggest difficulty in implementing this plan is how to get as many officials as possible to study in the school. And this large-scale corruption case just provided an opportunity for Joseph. Joseph was thinking about the reform of the civil service, and the carriage had slowly stopped. Emin reminded him, "Your Highness, we have arrived at Notre Dame." Joseph nodded and looked out the window, and saw that the Archbishop of Paris, Beaumont, had already led a large group of priests to wait respectfully in the square in front of the main entrance of the church. He immediately got out of the car with a smile and had a conversation with Beaumont, who came up, and then he got straight to the point. "Respected Archbishop, I need you to help me build a university. Yes, for education. It is best to find the Ministry of Education of France, the Catholic Church. The church not only has rich experience in running schools and can draw out teachers at any time, but also pays great attention to the maintenance of royal power. Moreover, the administrative university is not like a police academy, where classes can be held by just building a warehouse and a playground on wasteland. The administrative university represents the face of the French bureaucracy, and the necessary things cannot be saved. Archbishop Beaumont smiled when he heard this. The Crown Prince wanted to build a university, which meant that a large amount of funds would be handled by the church, which was a rare and lucrative job. He nodded repeatedly. "Your Highness, it is my great honor to serve you. I wonder what kind of university you want to build, and how big it is." "Royal Administrative University." Joseph walked to the reception room behind Notre Dame with familiarity and said to Beaumont, "It mainly teaches courses such as economics, management, society, law, and engineering." "Oh, of course, it doesn't have to be as in-depth as the University of Paris. All courses can be completed within 1 year, or even half a year." He then gave a general introduction to the main functions of the university, and then said, "As for the scale, it will be built according to the scale of 1,500 students in the early stage, but space for expansion must be reserved." "Archbishop." Beaumont signaled the assistant beside him to take careful notes, and gave a lot of suggestions on school construction. Finally, rubbing his hands, he smiled and said, "Your Highness, it's just that the time you gave is too short, only 3 months. This may significantly increase the construction cost." Joseph nodded carelessly. "Then we have to ask the church to pay in advance." "Ah, thank you, Your Highness." Beaumont responded subconsciously, but suddenly froze and exclaimed, "No, Your Highness, you said you would let the church pay in advance. This university may cost 500,000 francs to build. How can the church come up with so much money?" Joseph patted him on the back. came closer and said, the church's manor east of the Seine River can be renovated and used. It shouldn't cost so much, and it can speed up the progress. Beaumont became anxious when he heard this. Your Highness, this is not. Joseph smiled mysteriously and lowered his voice. Archbishop, a large number of officials may have been investigated recently. I think people from the church can fill some positions. This administrative reform is tantamount to a major surgical operation for France. Joseph could not predict what emergencies he would encounter. To be on the safe side, he decided to enlist the help of the church to support him. Even though the church is far less powerful than it was under Louis XIII, it still has some political influence. At least by roping in the church, we can prevent them from colluding with the bureaucracy. Chapter 485. Let's break the news first. As for allowing priests to participate in politics, this has a long history in France. In the past, there were outstanding politicians like Archbishop Richelieu, and now there are active ministers like Briand and Talleyrand. Therefore, giving the church some replacement officials will not have a big impact on French politics. In fact, judging from the past situation, priests will basically become pure bureaucrats after entering politics, and their connection with the church will gradually fade. After all, the butt determines the head. Moreover, this group of priests who are engaged in politics will inevitably take the lead to enter the administrative university for further study, a university built by their own church. They have to support it, right? When Archbishop Beaumont heard that he could allocate official quotas to the church, he suddenly became full of smiles. It is also the responsibility of the church to help His Majesty the King control his people. He asked carefully, Your Highness, how many people are needed to serve? The church can make some preparations in advance. In the past, priests who held official positions were basically those selected by the king for their outstanding personal abilities, and the number was not very large, especially for local positions. It is even rarer for priests to hold them. Beaumont knew very well that more than 40 officials were arrested this time, and they were all high-ranking local officials. This was definitely a rare opportunity for the church. Joseph glanced at him and said in a long tone, well, at least 10 positions. Among them, there will be at least assistant to the municipal commissioner and the like, depending on the progress of the administration university. There may be more. Beaumont was immediately overjoyed. If the church's manor was renovated, the cost of building the university would not exceed 200,000 francs. Well, the previous 500,000 francs included oil and water, so the deal was very cost effective. He hurriedly said, please rest assured, I will personally supervise the construction of the political management university and I will definitely satisfy you. Joseph continued, by the way, the positions that the church is filling this time are all left by officials who were previously dealt with for corruption. And I also want to take the opportunity to rectify the bureaucracy and hope that the church can cooperate. Beaumont hurriedly put on a solemn expression like a clergyman. Those corrupt guys will not go to heaven. The church has always taught the world with God's holy teachings, and one of the 10 commandments is not to be greedy for money. This time the church will definitely condemn it severely for their crimes, and praise His Majesty for their just punishment. Thank you for your warning words. Joseph smiled and nodded, then pulled the archbishop and said, after that, there will be administrative university branches in Lyon and Bordeaux, which may also need the church's help. A week later, nearly 1,000 people gathered outside the Paris High Court, peering into the iron fence. Today is the day of trial for the Count of Norfolk, governor of Poitou. Although it was not a public trial, there had been overwhelming publicity in newspapers, and even the church had twice publicly condemned the large amount of corruption that had occurred recently. Therefore, the public was extremely concerned about the trial, and gathered here early in the morning to wait for the results in the courtroom on the first floor of the High Court. Dubourg, as the presiding judge, listened to the shouts of severe punishment for corrupt criminals outside the window, and looked at Norfolk, who was staggering onto the dock, and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Obviously, the royal family's intention is to scare the monkeys, but if they sentence a governor severely, they will inevitably suffer the dissatisfaction of the bureaucratic class in the future. After all, the rabbit dies and the fox is sad. You know, in the past, if a noble and high-ranking official embezzled only a few 100,000 livres, he only needed to make up the money, and at most he would be dismissed, and he would not even be prosecuted. He took a deep breath, read the opening statement according to the procedure, and then the trial began. While he was still thinking about how to satisfy the royal family and sentence Norfolk as lightly as possible. The prosecutor over there had finished his prosecution statement and the defendant's lawyer had begun to speak. The lawyer glanced at the governor of Poitou and said to Dubois, "Your Honor, my client has something to say." Norfolk gritted his teeth and immediately said loudly, "I want to expose it, hoping to reduce my guilt." He recalled the list he had given to the crown prince before and said, "The first is Baron Barant, Angoumois' financial assistant. He once bribed me 8,000 livres and asked me to help him." This sentence made more than a dozen nobles in the auditorium widen their eyes and were so shocked that they could not speak. This kind of biting in court is definitely a taboo in officialdom. Norfolk not only offended Baron Barant, but also became the enemy of the entire bureaucracy. Not to mention that he no longer has to think about becoming an official, whether he is engaged in business or farming. As long as he is still in France, there will be people who will secretly plot against him and will not stop until he is killed. Unexpectedly, Norfolk was completely letting go. After talking about Barant, he started to expose the municipal assistant of Angoumois. In this way, the nobles who were watching listened with shock on their faces as the Earl of Norfolk kept saying a personal name, and they had forgotten to count the number of people it was. In short, the officialdom of the entire Poitou province is definitely going to fall. Dubois' hands were trembling slightly. Why did this happen in his court? Will these officials who were dragged down by Norfolk take the blame on themselves in the future? Who am I? Why am I here? What am I going to do? He listened to the revelations for several hours and finally announced with a blank mind that the court was adjourned temporarily and would continue tomorrow. Then he escaped from the court as if he had seen a ghost and drove directly to the Tuileries Palace. The clerk on the side looked at the confession he had copied for dozens of pages and he was stunned, not knowing what to do. At the same time, similar scenes were also being played out at several nearby court trials. Officials involved in corruption were frantically exposing their colleagues. In just this morning, hundreds of senior officials were dragged into the water as the news from the court spread. The outside of the High Court suddenly exploded. The reporters pounced on the nobles who had just listened to the trial like hungry wolves, asking about the situation of the officials who had been exposed, and almost tore those people into 8 pieces. The people were even more furious, shouting, "Hang! Let all corrupt officials go to hell," and the names of the officials who had just been tried, and began to march along the streets outside the High Court. As more citizens heard the news and joined the march, the number of people quickly doubled. Then someone shouted, "Petition to His Majesty the King," and the marchers immediately rushed towards the direction of the Palace of Versailles. That afternoon, a highly efficient newspaper published the names of officials who were exposed in court. The Press and Publication Bureau had received Joseph's instructions long ago, and all such news was given the green light. The second floor of the Tuileries Palace. The President of the Supreme Court, Duport, entered the office of the Crown Prince with a pale face, even forgetting to salute, and said in a lost voice, "Your Highness, it's bad, it's bad. Norfolk has implicated more than 30 people in court. No, maybe 50 people. All of them are corrupt, dereliction of duty, etc." Joseph just smiled at him. "Your Excellency, if I remember correctly, you have another trial in the afternoon, right? Oh, please sit down and have a cup of tea, and then you have to go back as soon as possible. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 486, The Jacobin Crack. Dubois looked at His Royal Highness the Crown Prince's calm expression and seemed to understand something. He nodded in a low voice. Yes, Your Highness. There will be a trial of Baron Aston Order's corruption case at 3 o'clock. Then, I won't drink tea. I have to go back to the High Court first. Please, help me deliver Dean Dubois. Joseph gestured to Emin, and then said to Dubois with a smile, "Oh, please don't forget what I told you before, to the Earl of Norfolk and others. People decide according to their discretion. After all, they have circumstances to expose." Dubois was startled. He originally thought that the Crown Prince was following the usual practice of opening a loophole for the nobles. Looking at it now, His Highness may have known that corrupt officials would be exposed in court. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead again, as if he knew something terrible. "Yes, Your Highness, I will definitely judge impartially." His thoughts whirled, and he quickly added, "Besides, I just had lunch after the trial, and didn't go anywhere else." Joseph nodded with satisfaction. What Dubois said was to express that he had never been here, that is to say, he would not disassociate himself from the exposure of corrupt officials. He is a man who knows the rules of politics well. In the afternoon, the High Court hearing continued, but Dubois and other judges in the official corruption case were not as panicked as they were in the morning. Faced with the endless revelations from those officials, they just ordered the clerk to carefully copy them, and then announced that the trial would be postponed. In a cafe across the street from the High Court, Merritt looked out the window at the excited citizens, tapped the newspaper on the table, and said with emotion, "Although I don't know how His Royal Highness the Crown Prince discovered that those officials were corrupt, but obviously, he was right." He looked at Desmoulins opposite, smiled and shook his head. The number of corrupt officials he identified alone exceeded the workload of the investigation bureau in a year. According to this trend, within a few years, those dirty officials will be. He can take care of everything. I have to admit that he is the guardian of the French people when it comes to fighting corruption. Desmoulins was surprised that Mr. Merritt, who was always hostile to the royal family, could have such an evaluation of the Crown Prince, and immediately nodded in agreement. In fact, not long after he joined the Impartial Investigation Bureau, he had already admired the Crown Prince very much, but because Merritt didn't like the royal family, he never showed it. The King, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is indeed very different from those vampires, he said excitedly. I heard that he was behind the abolition of aristocratic privileges and the ability for farmers to redeem their land. He was behind the scenes." He grabbed the newspaper that published a large list of exposed officials. His eyes were shining. Now he is attacking officials and bureaucrats again. Or maybe we should fully support him. At least I can see with my eyes that he has made France more just and prosperous, and the people are better than before." Merritt breathed a sigh of relief and interrupted him. "We can't betray our beliefs. Although he has done a lot of useful things, he may become a tyrant at any time, just like Louis XIV. In the later stages of his reign, didn't all the glorious achievements turn into heavy suffering for the people?" He said word for word, "Only a government formed with the authorization of the people can guarantee eternal justice and fairness. We need a constitution, human rights, and freedom, instead of waiting for charity from the king or his son." After hearing this, Desmoulins stood up excitedly and said loudly, "Why do we have to break it? Because of some theories, when there is a perfect situation, the British have a constitution and a parliament, but their officials are still corrupt, and ordinary people are oppressed by the same masters. They are not even allowed to wander, and the police will not hesitate to throw them into prison. I dare say that, if the British Parliament were to take care of France, it would never do a better job than the current royal family. At least, most of their land was bought by nobles and wealthy businessmen, and French farmers own far more arable land than British farmers." Merritt stared at his old friend with wide eyes, feeling that he had abandoned Mr. Rousseau's thoughts and was deceived by the royal family. This was a very bad sign. He suddenly noticed something again, and said to Desmoulins in surprise, "Your stuttering seems to have improved." "Yes, really?" Desmoulins' selfless state disappeared instantly. I just want to discuss the future of France with you. Time will tell." Merritt unexpectedly did not want to continue this topic, and turned to the window and gestured. "I'm afraid we will be very busy recently. You see, hundreds of corrupt officials have been implicated." Desmoulins just nodded silently. At this moment, an imperceptible rift appeared between the two Jacobin standard bearers. Palace of Versailles in the drawing room of the Crown Prince's palace. There were more than a dozen pale-faced officials standing, each of them almost hanging their heads on their feet, so nervous that they didn't dare to take a breath. Joseph held the teacup calmly, glanced at these people, and said, "You have also seen that the citizens outside have been marching for 2 days, demanding that all those involved in corruption be hanged." The officials in the room suddenly shook even more violently. They were all confessed in court by Norfolk and others. They had previously consulted the Minister of Justice and Brian, but were told that the matter was serious and would be difficult to solve. Finally, Brian hinted to them that they had a chance of survival if they went to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, so they came here. Unexpectedly, what they heard was "Hanging Your Highness," an old man at the head said tremblingly. We have always been loyal to His Majesty the King. For the sake of God, please help us plead with His Majesty." Joseph looked at his watch and felt that he was almost frightened, so he said slowly, "But it is also possible that when the Earl of Norfolk faced a serious punishment, he framed you indiscriminately in order to exonerate himself." All the officials immediately nodded. "That's right. That's it. Your Highness is truly a son of the gods, and you can see through their lies at a glance. We have all been framed. Please help us clarify." "Thank you, Your Highness. You are as just as God." Joseph glanced at them again and said, "I will let people conduct a fair investigation to clear your innocence. Of course, this will take some time. In the meantime, I think you should temporarily suspend your duties to show your attitude to His Majesty the King and the people." Chapter 487 The Power of the Royal Family. When the officials heard that the Crown Prince said he was willing to help them make the decision, there was no hesitation at all. They rushed to nod and said, "Thank you for your trust, Your Highness. We all listen to you. Yes, we are willing to accept investigation and prove our innocence. Praise you, Your Majesty the Crown Prince. It is you who gave us life." Joseph raised his hand to signal them to be quiet, and said casually, "By the way, His Majesty the King happened to have built a new Royal Administrative University. During your suspension, you can go there to study and learn something about management and sociology. You can also stay in Paris to inquire about the results of the investigation at any time." The officials looked at each other in surprise, not knowing what the Crown Prince meant, but as long as he could get rid of his troubles, what did it matter if he went to the university for a while? So a group of people nodded and bowed in agreement. Soon, the officials who had been exposed heard the news, and they immediately rushed to the Crown Prince for help. They had even gone to Queen Mary before, but the Queen had no idea what was going on, so she sent them away directly. It was all pushed to Brian. In other words, the Crown Prince's place is their only way to survive right now. However, the Dauphin left the Palace of Versailles, and no one could find out his whereabouts. The officials who were anxious to get angry found out from the dozen colleagues who had successful experience that His Highness had told them to go to some university for further study. They couldn't find the Crown Prince, so they rushed to the doctor because of their illness, and then went to the church to inquire about the administrative university. Subsequently, the Royal Administrative University, which was still under construction, received applications from nearly 100 senior officials. Even the priest responsible for registration received a large amount of benefits every day, just to expedite admission. 3 days later, the first Paris police review ceremony was held grandly on the Champs-Élysées Square in Paris. Her Majesty the Queen was present, but Her Majesty the Crown Prince, as the planner of police reform, was responsible for presiding over the review. After the vigorous publicity of major newspapers in the past few days, the public is paying attention to this review ceremony, and even the interest in the trial of corrupt officials has dropped a lot. Thousands of citizens gathered on both sides of the Champs-Élysées, peering in and out, looking extremely curious about this never before held review ceremony. After a salute, solemn music sounded all around. Then people saw His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, dressed in a blue police uniform, standing on a carriage and slowly passing through the middle of the square. Behind him were more than a dozen tall flag bearers holding the royal golden iris flag and the police badge flag with iris and shield. Behind them were 4 4-pound cannons dragged by more than a dozen horses. The muzzle of the cannon reflected sunlight, which stung the onlookers and subconsciously raised their hands. To cover their eyes as the cannon passed by, a square formation composed of 5 Paris policemen entered the scene one after another. There are 150 people in each square, all carrying brand new flintlock guns, with straight uniforms and impressive weapons, making them look majestic. When a neat police phalanx passed in front of Queen Mary's position, the policemen forming the phalanx immediately shouted, "Long live His Majesty the King, long live Her Majesty the Queen," and swear to the death to maintain law and order in France. The shout echoed over the square, startling a large group of birds, and flying into the clouds. The onlookers stood up straight unconsciously in this solemn and majestic atmosphere, impressed by the majestic momentum of the Paris police. As Queen Mary stood up and waved to the police phalanx, the 5 phalanxes passed the viewing platform and stood in the square. Then Joseph raised his hand to signal to the phalanx, and a police officer immediately shouted an order. The police phalanx on the far left instantly transformed into a semi-encirclement formation and began to demonstrate the process of launching an attack on gang members. The policemen moved neatly and skillfully, pointing their flintlock guns straight ahead and pulling the triggers at the same time. Suddenly a burst of black smoke enveloped the square. The onlookers were startled, but soon realized that the guns were not loaded with bullets, and then they clapped vigorously and applauded the police for their wonderful demonstration. After the 5 police phalanxes demonstrated different training subjects, even the cannons were simulated firing. Of course, there were no shells loaded either. The 500 to 600 nobles sitting in the viewing gallery fell into silence while listening to the deafening roar of the cannon. Many of them were officials involved in this corruption case. At this moment, they were watching the various displays of force by the police, and their thoughts inevitably surged in their hearts. This is just a police force in Paris that can be mobilized at any time, which is enough to calm down anyone with impure thoughts immediately. Behind the police, there is the Royal Guards Corps, which is even more powerful and completely loyal to the royal family. Those officials who were originally dissatisfied with the royal family for not stopping the High Court as usual and allowing Norfolk and others to take advantage of them suddenly felt clear-headed, and all their dissatisfaction with the royal family disappeared instantly. They only felt that solving the problem within the framework of the court was the most appropriate of point. After the ceremony of reviewing the police force was over, Joseph stepped onto the viewing platform and praised the Paris police for their contribution to maintaining public order. Then he suddenly mentioned the newly built administrative university. After the establishment of this university, officials will enter the school in batches to study professional courses related to their duties so that they can better complete their jobs. After saying this, he signaled to the chief of police, Viscount Besançon. The latter raised his hat to the crown prince and then came to the stage, first talking about the police force, and then the topic turned to the recent official corruption case. After the recent police investigation, it has been basically confirmed that the so-called revelations of Norfolk, Caston and others are just slanders against others in order to reduce the penalty. Of course, the subsequent investigation of the officials exposed will continue. Please pay attention to the newspaper news. On the Champs-Élysées Square, the officials involved in the corruption case were relieved when they heard the words, "The Queen and the Crown Prince were present," which should be the royal family's confirmation that they would not investigate the matter further in the next few days. The number of applications received by the Administrative Management University increased several times. The officials are all smart people. Through various sources of information, they have realized that coming here for further study is a necessary factor to get rid of the case, so they naturally dare not delay. Even those officials who are not on the revelation list will come to sign up for safety, as long as they feel uneasy. Before the opening of the Administrative Management University, the number of students has exceeded 1,000 and is still increasing. What Joseph didn't expect was that the administrative university actually received more than 1.1 million francs in donations. The officials couldn't figure out why the royal family asked them to come here for further studies. Later, some smart people guessed that the royal family might want to pay a fine to them through tuition fees. So in order to show their proactive attitude, they paid the tuition fees in advance. Joseph naturally wouldn't return the money to them. There is still a big hole of 2.2 billion in the treasury, and any little bit of it is good. Just when the French officialdom was busy, Joseph was driving to Reims to hold a ceremony to review the police. After that, he would go to Lyon, Bordeaux and other places for the same review. Since it has been decided to take a heavy hand in the reform of the civil service, it is very necessary to show the authority of the royal family, to deter officials with different ideas. Chapter 488 The first step in the reform of official administration. Reims, a province immediately east of Paris. Market Inspector Viscount Duran watched hundreds of majestic police officers walking past him in neat steps, and couldn't help but feel solemn in his heart. He clearly remembered that just a year ago, the police in Reims were no different from street gangsters. Not to mention that hundreds of people walked with the same sound now, and it was difficult to even get them to stand up straight. Now these police officers are highly paid and highly disciplined. They are directly commanded by the police department, and are not under the jurisdiction of the city hall. He secretly sighed that the police were no longer under the control of the nobles. Joseph originally wanted to hold a police review ceremony in Reims like the one in Paris, but the police training here was still a little poor. The police department said that they had to prepare a month in advance to barely achieve the effect he wanted. So he had no choice but to change the review to a police parade around the city. Unexpectedly, because a large number of citizens followed and watched, it eventually turned into a parade of thousands of people, and the momentum was not much weaker than that in Paris. Hey, have you heard? An official wearing a long black coat with protruding cheekbones suddenly approached Viscount Duran, touched him with his elbow, and said mysteriously, "Earl of Norfolk, the reason why those people exposed other officials in court was because they were forced by the intelligence agency." Viscount Duran's expression suddenly changed. He rubbed his ears with exaggerated movements and said loudly, "Baron Chevalier, the drums are too loud." "What did you say? I didn't hear clearly." "I mean, Chevalier," was about to say it again, when he saw that Duran had turned around and greeted a middle-aged man. "Mr. Gerard, long time no see. You are here too." Chevalier had no choice but to turn to another official and tell him about the big thing he had learned about, but the latter quickly avoided him with a strange expression. He suddenly felt depressed and happened to see his cousin-in-law, Baron Alex, Lance's financial assistant, in the crowd, so he squeezed past and waved to him. "Henry, it's great to see you. Well, regarding the person implicated in the recent corruption case, I heard news that it is the intelligence bureau." As soon as he was halfway through speaking, he was interrupted sharply by his cousin-in-law. "Stop talking." The latter looked around and whispered seriously, "I always remind you not to listen to other people's nonsense, let alone spread it everywhere." "No, this is not a rumor. It was said by Viscount Charles Burney." Viscount Burney is one of the more than 40 senior officials tried for corruption this time. Baron Alex glanced nervously at the queue of policemen carrying flintlock guns not far away, and raised his hand to cover his mouth. "The royal family has suppressed this matter, which is the best result. You are still here. Are you saying this to attract the Notary Investigation Bureau to investigate us?" His voice became even lower. Previously, the High Court only tried 4 people, and hundreds of officials were implicated. When all the more than 40 people later are tried, it is very likely that we will also be on the list of people exposed. The most important thing is that no one can withstand the investigation, whether you, me, the municipal commissioner, the trade coordinator, etc. So we just need to cooperate with the royal family and don't cause any complications. When he saw Chevalier nodding, he let go of his mouth and warned, "Get ready after you go back and follow me to Paris to register for the Royal University of Administrative Management in a few days." After the police parade ended, Baron Alex thought for a moment and ordered the driver to transfer to the police station. Not long after, he said to the police officer who received him, "I want to report that Viscount Charles Burney spread rumors and framed the intelligence bureau." In the office next to him, Viscount Duran was also reporting on the same thing. Joseph returned to Paris after presiding over a police parade in Bordeaux. He first made a detour to the University of Administrative Management and gave a speech on behalf of Louis XVI at the opening ceremony. Yes, with the generous sponsorship and constant urging from many officials, in just 1.5 months, the university completed the preparatory work at light speed and was ready to start classes. There were more than 600 students in the first batch, far exceeding the original plan. Moreover, if you want to be among the first batch to attend class, you have to go to the church through the back door. There are thousands of officials waiting in line behind you. When Joseph came out of school, he looked up and saw a rental notice hanging on the house across the street. The rent was as high as 40 francs a month. This price is almost equivalent to 1 month's salary of an ordinary civil servant. He patted his forehead and felt regretful. Why hadn't he thought of such a good real estate project before? This is a house in the top school district. There is definitely nothing wrong with selling a house for 20,000 to 30,000 francs. You know, the people who come to stay here are all officials, so you can still get this little money. And after buying it, even if you don't live in it, you can easily rent it out at a high price. Some smart businessmen will also invest in buying a house. If you build a new community in this area, you can earn at least tens of millions of francs. Thinking of this, Joseph hurriedly told Demon to send people to buy all the vacant land near the administration university. It is not too late to remedy the situation. Doesn't this raise more funds for tax reform? The next day. At the Palace of Versailles, a regular cabinet meeting is being held in the conference hall. Next is the proposal of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Brian looked at the document in front of him and said in a steady tone, His Royal Highness suggests that officials in charge of road administration, water conservancy and other aspects should be allowed to go to university for study, because the areas they are responsible for require a lot of professional knowledge. If these officials fail the professional assessment, it proves that they are not suitable for this job, and other people can be assigned to the position. Mirabeau immediately nodded in agreement. Your Royal Highness is very thoughtful. It is hard to imagine that a road director who can't even understand the roadbed construction drawings can build a road of qualified quality. Brian looked around at several cabinet ministers. Then we will follow His Royal Highness's proposal and let officials in these fields go to the Administrative Management University in batches for further study, and in the future, positions that require higher professional knowledge should first study and obtain relevant graduation certificates before they can take up their posts. Everyone nodded in agreement. There are not many official positions in water conservancy and road administration, and the power they hold is not great, so no one cares too much. The ministers turned their heads and looked at Queen Mary again. The latter was still admiring a beautiful bird outside the window. Now the Dauphin could help her take care of most things, and she was becoming more and more lazy to worry about it, until Brian coughed lightly. She turned back suddenly and smiled awkwardly. Chapter 489 Queen Mary's Determination. Queen Mary hurriedly picked up the document in front of her, but she didn't know which one she had just mentioned, so she had to glance at Joseph beside her for help. Seeing her son nod slightly, she immediately put on a majestic posture and nodded. I agree with the proposal. Please ask Archbishop Brian to prepare the relevant decree. Brian hurriedly bowed and said, Yes, Your Majesty. Joseph was also relieved in his heart. It seems that his sausage-cutting tactics were successful. Although the impact on officials in water conservancy and road administration is minimal, once this decree is signed, it will be equivalent to opening a precedent for officials to take exams to get a job. How to define the so-called high professional knowledge requirements position specifically? There is a lot of room for operation here. Do you think finance requires professional knowledge? Does industrial management require professional knowledge? What about agriculture? What about trade? What about justice? In the future, more and more government positions will be included in the scope of professional examinations, and eventually all positions will be included. The most important step of the official reform will be completed. By then, the professional study of officials can also be open to institutions such as the University of Paris and the University of Toulouse, and the administrative university will only be responsible for the assessment. By then, it will become a complete version of the civil servant examination, and the civil servant reform will be completely completed. The most important thing is that this process is gradual and will not arouse strong opposition from the existing bureaucracy. Of course, there will definitely be people who are dissatisfied with this system. After all, some of the useless children and grandchildren of the nobles cannot be appointed as high-ranking officials just by relying on their network of relationships. but they will also think of the grand occasion of the review of the police force, and thus turn their dissatisfaction into complaints. Just talking about it. In fact, even such a civil servant examination system has huge advantages for the nobles. First of all, the tuition fees of universities in this era are very high, and ordinary people can't afford it at all. Secondly, the children of the nobles are more familiar with the assessment content of the administrative university. Their fathers are the first group of people to study here. Now is not like the internet age. The real questions of the civil service examination can be found everywhere, and even if the common people have no problem with professional subjects, they may not be able to beat the nobles in the civil service examination. Therefore, the nobles have no objection to taking the civil service examination. After all, the nobles control most of the government positions. Joseph would not pursue absolute equality. At least in the 18th century, the role of the nobles was irreplaceable. Then, Brian continued, the next proposal. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince suggested the establishment of an auxiliary administrative agency as a supplement to the main administrative department that can immediately take over the management when an accident occurs. Seeing that everyone did not understand, Joseph explained, I thought of this problem from this corruption case, as you know, there are more than 40 officials on trial in court, and most of them will be convicted. The things they are responsible for will face stagnation in a short period of time, which is a risk that must be considered. So, I think it is possible to establish an auxiliary administrative agency, and the job setting will refer to the existing government departments, but no actual power is granted at ordinary times. Once an existing official encounters an accident, the corresponding officials can be transferred from the auxiliary agency to take over. Baron Breteuil, the Minister of Justice, immediately frowned and said, Your Highness, but this will increase the salary expenditure of officials. And according to what you said, these people in the auxiliary institutions are useless most of the time. Joseph smiled and said, Your concerns are very reasonable, so the salaries of the officials in the auxiliary institutions will be set relatively low, and they can also do some work within their capabilities, such as organizing documents, copying materials, etc. But this is still, Mirabeau observed the expression of the prince, stood up and said, Baron Breteuil, do you know how long the administrative management of various places has been interrupted by the imprisonment of a large number of officials this time? It may be more than a month. The losses caused during this period are enough to pay the salaries of officials across the country for half a year. I think your highness's suggestion is very good. Not only can it stabilize the administrative management, but it can also allow those idle nobles to take on part-time jobs and make some contributions to the country. Joseph immediately gave him an approving look. What about letting the nobles contribute to the country? Fortunately, Mirabeau can be related to this. Joseph just wanted to create a lot of empty positions to arrange those guys who paid for the positions. After all, they paid real money and signed an agreement with the government. It is really difficult to dismiss them directly if they don't make any big mistakes. So he referred to the Nanjing garrison court in the Ming dynasty and set up this auxiliary administrative agency. Looking at the names of the official positions, they are exactly the same as your previous ones, but once you are transferred from the Beijing court to Nanjing, you will lose all your power and just wait for retirement. When the professional assessment of officials is gradually popularized in the future, all officials who are just sitting there doing nothing and only thinking about making money will definitely be stuck in the assessment. So you can only be wrong to go to the auxiliary position to accumulate experience. As for raising a group of bureaucrats, Joseph does not think it is a waste of money. On the contrary, replacing these guys who have sold their positions with people who can do practical things will bring positive impetus to the country, and the benefits generated will be far higher than their salary. Not to mention that the auxiliary position can at least do some things like sorting documents, so that a few less ordinary clerks can be hired, and it will not cost much more. Baron Breteuil heard this and thought that the Crown Prince wanted to create more official positions so that he could collect more official fees. So he stopped talking and sat down silently. Queen Mary was not distracted this time. Seeing that the ministers had no objection, she signed the document handed over by Brian. This small-scale administrative adjustment did not even require the king to sign a decree. After discussing some daily affairs, this cabinet meeting, which seemed ordinary, but actually had a far-reaching impact on France, came to an end. Queen Mary looked at Brian's back, remembered the scene at today's meeting, and suddenly called him to stop. Brian turned back and bowed slightly to her. "Your Majesty, do you have any other instructions?" Queen Mary hesitated and said, "Archbishop Brian, do you think that, if I don't attend the cabinet meeting, can the Crown Prince lead the ministers to properly handle government affairs?" Brian thought to himself, yes, of course. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince has long supported the overall situation of France. In fact, if you don't attend, the efficiency of the meeting may be higher. However, he still showed great surprise and shouted, "You are the soul of France. If you don't preside over the cabinet, it will be a disaster for the country." Chapter 490 High Mass. Queen Mary pondered deeply. The Crown Prince has outstanding abilities and is favored by the Lord. I think he should be given a broader stage. Brian secretly glanced at the Queen's expression and felt that she must be serious, so he said cautiously, "I can understand your Majesty's efforts to train the Crown Prince. Perhaps we can let His Highness try to preside over a few cabinet meetings first, and you can provide guidance on the side, so there shouldn't be any problems." After hearing this, Queen Mary finally made up her mind. "Since you think so, then the next cabinet meeting should be chaired by the Crown Prince." After saying this sentence, she suddenly felt relaxed all over, just like the moment of relaxation and comfort when she returned to the bedroom after an all-night dance and threw off the tight waist and stiff leather shoes. Brian was also relieved and hurriedly bowed again. "As you wish, Your Majesty." After he left, the golden door of the conference hall closed with a bang. Queen Mary stretched her arms and stretched herself. Cakes, jewelry and beautiful dresses flashed in her mind. "Please ask Sicilian to help me make a mint cocoa cake." She stood up with a smile, ordered the maid to Benenac, and then whispered to herself, "Joseph can definitely take care of everything." June 3, 1790. The Hall of Notre Dame de Paris was packed with seats, and even thousands of citizens gathered outside the church, devoutly looking at the huge looming Jesus statue in the church. Right in front of the hall, an aide in white robes turned his back to everyone, bowed and raised the unfolded Bible above his head. In front of him, Archbishop Beaumont recited scriptures with a sacred and solemn expression. Yes, a big mass for the feast of Corpus Christi is taking place here. Joseph sat at the front of all the people attending the mass, but his attention was not at all on the Archbishop, who was chattering in Latin. He was probably the French Crown Prince with the worst Latin in the past century, and he still can't understand Latin writing, let alone listening in real time. He tilted his head slightly and whispered to Fouche, who was sitting behind him, "Has it been verified?" "Yes, Your Highness." The director of the intelligence bureau leaned forward and also lowered his voice very low. "The news was leaked by Viscount Charles Burney through the bailiff guarding him. He himself and the 6 people who later spread the news all confessed." Joseph narrowed his eyes slightly. Burney was obviously unwilling to be exiled, so he deliberately revealed that he had asked him to expose officials, hoping to incite the officials' anger and force the High Court and the royal family to make concessions. Fortunately, he held police inspections in various places, and the church also helped build momentum, so the officials did not believe his rumors. If this matter had been discussed a year ago, the bureaucracy would probably have made the whole country uneasy. Joseph was angry and ordered Fouche, "All officials involved in this corruption case must be investigated strictly. As for Burney, let's change the place of exile to New Zealand. Oh, and his friend who is a prison guard should also go with him." Originally, he had reached an agreement with Burney and others. The latter would expose corrupt officials in court in exchange for being exiled to Lisle, a relatively prosperous place, and retaining a small portion of his property. "But since this guy wants to cause trouble, let's go to a small island in the Pacific to her cheap." "Yes, Your Highness." Fouche bowed and responded, then said cautiously, "Your Highness, I think Burney's message has spread among the officials. Although they dare not say anything on the surface, they will definitely be dissatisfied in their hearts." A flash of excitement flashed in his eyes. "Perhaps we should arrest all those who have spread this rumor to prevent." Joseph turned his head and rolled his eyes at him. thinking to himself, you just want to find an opportunity to improve your performance, right? He shook his head and said, you will only intensify the situation. I have already made arrangements for the follow-up matters, so you don't need to worry. After this incident, he has initially reached a plan for administrative reform. Since the bureaucracy has accepted the reality, it should be cautious. Slap and give candy is always the best management model point according to Joseph's plan. It will be announced later that some civilians will be admitted to the administrative university, while official taxes will be significantly reduced, and officials' salaries will be increased. Yes, he wants to increase officials' income. Because currently, the legal income of French civil servants is really very low. This all stems from the fact that French kings have always treated the bureaucracy as a business. Since it is a business, it must be profitable. So the price for selling an official was sky high. Any position with some power would cost tens of thousands of francs, and a minimum price for a municipal level official position was 30,000 francs. As for the salaries of officials, they are very low. The salary of ordinary civil servants starts at 50 francs, and the salary of officials at the deputy mayor level is only more than 90 francs. And you also have to pay official position tax every year. This weird tax is stipulated in the Edict of Paulet promulgated in the era of Henry IV. All purchased official positions must pay a tax of 1/70th of the official price every year in order to continue to perform their duties. Otherwise they will be suspended immediately. For example, the above mentioned ordinary civil servant. After deducting official tax from his salary, his actual income was less than 40 francs. The actual income of the deputy mayor is 60 francs. Relying on this model, since Louis XVI came to the throne, he has been able to bring in more than 40 million livres to the treasury every year by selling official positions and collecting official position taxes. This has led to the fact that the vast majority of French civil servants cannot live on their salaries alone. So they have to find their own way to make ends meet, ranging from taking money and getting paid, to taking corruption and bribery at the worst. This has become the norm in French officialdom. If you want to keep officials clean, you must at least give them a salary that allows them to live a decent life. The first half of Joseph's administrative reform was to break the nobility's monopoly on the bureaucracy and select capable people for office. The second half is to improve the treatment of officials, and by the way, to put an end to such bad things as selling officials as soon as possible. Of course, judging from France's current financial situation, it is not possible to completely ban the sale of official positions for the time being. However, according to his plan, the number of positions for sale will be reduced by at least half by next year. In front of the temple hall, Archbishop Beaumont finally ended the lengthy chanting ceremony and began to direct the priests to distribute Holy Communion to the believers present. Archbishop Beaumont glanced at the Crown Prince, who had been chatting with the intelligence chief. He did not feel dissatisfied at all. He immediately coughed and took advantage of this gap to speak loudly in French. The Lord says, the love of money is the root of evil. Some people, after being greedy for money, are led away from the truth and pierce themselves with many sorrows. Look, those greedy officials, even though they have been punished in the world, will eventually be judged by the Lord. Chapter 491. The Church is the king of making money. Beaumont had previously promised that the Crown Prince would cooperate with him in rectifying the bureaucracy, but he has been very concerned about it during this period. He has publicly condemned officials who are on trial for corruption whenever he can point. At the same time, at his request, churches in various places would bring Gehazi's portraits around the city to give speeches from time to time. Gehazi was a man in the Bible who was punished by God for being greedy for money and suffered from severe leprosy, become extremely pale. At least the painting looks very visually impressive. However, as the situation gradually calmed down, the church has not mentioned it much recently. Beaumont suddenly mentioned these things now. In fact, he wanted to show off in front of Joseph. Fouche took the wine from the priest's hand, glanced at Beaumont, who was chattering away, snorted disdainfully, and muttered, "Oh, those officials are not as greedy as you." Joseph looked back at him curiously. What should I say? Fouche realized that he had made some mistakes, but under the gaze of the Crown Prince, he could only whisper, "Your Highness, many people in the church know that Archbishop Beaumont's property is 3 to 4 million francs. This money He was born as a priest, so he knew a lot of information inside the church. When Joseph heard this, he took a breath, frowned and nodded. He also knew that as a first level priest, how could he not be greedy? In particular, France has strictly restricted the church's power to interfere with the secular world. Those in the church are left with the pursuit of making money. However, for now, he can only choose to temporarily cooperate with the church. After all, the church is more honest than the aristocracy and relies more on the royal family, so it is easier to control. If you want to carry out reforms at the national level, you must recruit forces that can be used by yourself and separate the first and second estates, that is, the cooperation between the priests and the nobility. After the various reforms in France are basically completed, the rectification of the church will definitely be put on the agenda. Apart from anything else, the fact that 1/10 of the country's land is in the hands of the church makes it impossible to let it go. You must know that historically, after the success of the French Revolution, the National Assembly relied on confiscating the church's land and using these lands as anchors to issue paper currency coupons, which barely managed to survive the initial financial crisis. In addition, the church is still collecting the tithe. Although the actual tax rate is not 10%, but about 7%, it is still a huge burden on the country's economic development. After everyone had received the Holy Communion, Beaumont also ended his criticism of corrupt officials and turned to wink at the priest on the side. The priest hurriedly took out a piece of paper with patterns and densely printed text and held it up to show it to everyone. Beaumont smiled and said, "This is a wealth guarantee coupon launched by the church in compliance with God's revelation. After purchasing this coupon, you will be blessed and avoid being harmed by greedy people." Joseph's eyes widened in shock. The church was really good at drawing inferences from one instance to another. It could even think of a coupon for such a trivial matter, but he could only watch. After all, in order to deceive the church into saving money, he promised to let the church sell improved indulgences. It can be seen that the church has been creating various coupons to make money over the past year. Joseph smacked his lips subconsciously, looking forward to what he would gain after reorganizing the church. The capital of Corsica. Ajaccio. In the room on the second floor of Congressman Girolamo's house, Bartolio, who is also a congressman, pushed a few pieces of paper to the middle of the table, then looked around at the people in the room and said, "This is from Mr. Ennio from Charleston. Oh, he went to the United States on my behalf 4 months ago." Another Corsican MP picked up the top piece of paper doubtfully and read, "Nabostown, Charleston, has had only 3 Massimo ladies for nearly 30 years, 2 of whom are still alive, and 1 who died at the beginning of the year." The deceased Mrs. Massimo had never mentioned that she had Corsican relatives before, and she was very poor, with all her family property adding up to less than $30. But people in the town saw that after her death, a man with an Italian accent came into contact with her nephew, her only relative, and then her nephew began to claim that she had been to Corsica. So Bartolo slapped the table hard and said angrily, "So Mrs. Pauly doesn't have any American aunt at all? Even if she did, she would only be left with an inheritance of $30 at most, not $10,000. Please, look at this again." He pulled out 2 documents from those papers and handed them to the congressman beside him. The latter could not understand English and handed the document back to him. Bartolio poked the 2 pieces of paper with his fingers and said, "These are certification documents issued by the Charleston City Hall. This one is a villa on the west side of Charleston, and this one is a huge cotton estate in the southern suburbs. They both belong to Mrs. Pauly, didn't you say that Mrs. Paoli did not inherit the inheritance?" Girolamo, the spy, immediately pretended to be confused. "This is not a legacy at all. Look at the transfer time on it." Bartolio gritted his teeth and said, "At the end of April, it means that this is a newly purchased property by Mrs. Pauly." Girolamo pointed to the price on the certification document and said in surprise, "The house and land combined are worth $100,000. Where did she get so much money?" All 7 members of Congress in the room suddenly became darkened. Oscar Pauly has always claimed that he is devoted to restoring his country and has no property at all. The house he lives in London was donated by supporters, but now a huge sum of $100,000 suddenly appeared. Without anyone reminding them, they immediately thought of the £25,000 of funding that was accidentally burned a few months ago, which is $120,000 and the property purchased by Paulie in the United States, plus the $10,000 inherited by his wife in the Netherlands, just matched this number. I think it's clear now, said Bartolio. Paulie betrayed us. Someone raised a question, but he had no reason to do that. No, he did. Or thin brown-haired man who had been silent before said, in fact, we got intelligence at the beginning of the year that the British seemed to be negotiating in France and might no longer provide asylum for Mr. Paulie. The speaker was an officer in charge of the intelligence agency of the Corsica Restoration Organization. He took a deep breath and continued, I reported this to Mr. Paulie, but he said he was not afraid of the French and told me not to worry. Girolamo immediately followed up. It seems that Mr. Paulie was ready to leave Britain from then on. He was going to say that the British no longer protected Paulie, but someone was one step ahead of him. The brown-haired man thought, no, not just leaving Britain. I think he might have made a deal with the French. Chapter 492. The evidence is conclusive. How is this possible? The square-faced middle-aged man who raised the question before shook his head vigorously. Mr. Paulie may go to the United States to escape, but he will never join the French. Mr. Cesar, then why did he swallow up Chalmers' money to fund the restoration organization? Bartolio said coldly, obviously, Mr. Paulie went to the United States to retire. Girolamo immediately added, he used the £25,000 as a pension. Everyone nodded. This is probably the only explanation. He may have also received some money from the French. This is not surprising. If he had not compromised, he would probably have been assassinated by the French. Only, Cesar still didn't want to believe it, but he couldn't find a reason to argue, so he just shook his head. Girolamo put on a sad expression, looked around the crowd and said, gentlemen, let's not talk about the money. I think of a more important thing. We will hold a riot in Calgus soon. If Mr. Paoli hooks up with the French, the riot will become very dangerous. Bartolio immediately frowned and nodded. You are right. But the riot has been prepared for a long time. If it is cancelled, based on our suspicions, other members of the organization may not agree. The Corsican Restoration Organization has a large number of people, with nearly 40 members of parliament and important leaders in total. The 7 of them alone have no power to change the riot plan. Girolamo pretended to think for a while, looked at a few people and said, I have an idea, but it may make Mr. Bartolio take responsibility. You tell me, I will do whatever you want for the restoration of the country. On behalf of the people of Corsica, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to you. Girolamo patted him and continued, you are responsible for liaison with London. You can tell Mr. Paoli that Call Jesus is out of business. There were some accidents, and after everyone discussed it, it was agreed that the date of the riot should be advanced 3 days, and the rest of us are not allowed to leave here from now on to ensure that the news doesn't leak out. If the French are prepared by then, it means Mr. Paulie betrayed us. Bartolio suddenly frowned deeply. If there is nothing wrong with Paulie, then he is betraying the organization by doing this. But if Paulie really colludes with the French, he can save a large number of members of the Zionist organization who participated in the riot. He quickly made a decision, nodded and said, okay, I agree with your plan, and am willing to bear the consequences. He firmly believes that Paulie has embezzled everyone's funding, so what he does will only serve the organization. Half a month later, as soon as the sky dawned, hundreds of people with their arms wrapped in red cloths carrying unknown objects silently poured into the Calgus City Hall, with people joining them constantly along the waypoint. When they arrived in front of the City Hall, the leader took out a long strip of something from the cloth bag behind his back and waved it vigorously. Before they could shout, a large number of troops suddenly appeared all around. Due to the Corsican decree, it is not smooth and police reform has not been carried out so far, so public security is still the responsibility of the army. Surrounding people wearing red cloth strips and pointing flintlock guns at them. Immediately, an officer shouted, I order them all to be arrested for rioting. As Soon as he finished speaking, several people wearing red cloth banners protested tremblingly, "Sir, we just came to the city hall to ask for an increase in wages. You have wronged us. We really did not engage in riots. You see, we are just poor porters." As he spoke, he took out a wooden sign from the cloth bag and raised it with the words 3 francs monthly increase written on it. The officer was a little confused and ordered someone to check. Sure enough, he found that everyone was carrying wooden signs, banners and the like. Without any weapons, he had no choice but to take away the first few people for questioning, while the others could only be sent away. That afternoon. In Girolamo's home, 7 members of the National Restoration Organization were sitting around casually with gloomy faces. After a long while, Girolamo broke the silence. "We must thank Mr. Bartorio for saving the Restoration Organization." After hearing this, everyone nodded to Bartolio to show respect. If he hadn't tested poorly, hundreds of members of the organization involved in the riot would have been arrested. "I just did what I had to do." The latter waved his hands tiredly and then said in a cold voice, "It is now clear that Paulie betrayed everyone. I only told him that the riot would be 3 days in advance, so he must have leaked the news to the French." Everyone nodded in agreement with this conclusion. But in fact they fell into a blind spot in their thinking. Although no one involved in the planning that day had left the room, the matter of rioting 3 days in advance could be discussed in advance, and Girolamo would bring it up. The Corsican army just waited for the date to go to Carrese to perform. This time, even Cesar, who had trusted Paulie the most before, remained silent. He lowered his head and clenched his fists, his eyes filled with anger. Bartolio continued, "I believe that Oscar Paulie can no longer be allowed to serve as the leader of the Zionist organization, and he should be expelled from the organization." Girolamo didn't expect that his lines would be snatched away again, so he hurriedly added, "I agree. It has always been us who have taken risks to promote the restoration movement, while Paoli has only been hiding in England to give orders. Now he has betrayed us." Cesar also shouted, "He is not worthy of leading the organization. Get him out." Bartorio nodded and sighed. "Then we will contact other members separately and expel Paoli at the next rally." The next day. The 7 Corsican members reunited at Girolamo's house. There were 6 more senior members of the Restoration Organization and a middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses and a slightly fat body. Bartorio bowed to the middle-aged man with glasses and then introduced him to everyone. "This is Mr. Chalmers. He is very famous in Scotland. I think everyone should have heard of his name." More than a dozen people in the room greeted Chalmers respectfully. This is the big brother who once spent £25,000 on the organization. Everyone seemed extremely attentive and enthusiastic. Chalmers nodded in return. Then his expression became serious, and he said in a deep voice, "I recently came to Ajaccio to invest in vineyards, but I heard about Mr. Paulie, which made me very sad and angry." He raised his arms again and said in a high voice, "But the great cause of national restoration cannot be interrupted by him alone. Here, right in front of me, there are many brave national restoration fighters." He looked around at everyone. "So, I decided to take out another £20,000 to help everyone run for Corsica Parliament next year. This time without the obstruction of that bastard Paulie. The National Restoration Forces will definitely be able to control the Parliament in one fell swoop." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 493. To avoid repeating the mistake of becoming emperor, more than a dozen people in the room were immediately ecstatic. They didn't expect to have such an unexpected harvest today. £20,000 is equivalent to 500,000 francs. With such a generous grant, no matter how you distribute it, you can get a lot. Everyone immediately enthusiastically surrounded Chalmers and started the rainbow fart mode. "You are truly a messenger of freedom and fairness. Your generosity brings hope to all Corsican people. On behalf of the people of Corsica, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to you. May God bless you." Chalmers smiled and greeted them politely, then suddenly said with a straight face, However, I have a requirement for the use of this money. That is, the recipient must sever ties with that guy Paulie. After hearing this, everyone nodded to express their understanding. After all, Polly embezzled £25,000 from someone else, and no one would be able to remain angry. Moreover, these people had just confirmed that Paulie had betrayed the organization, and they were originally preparing to bring him down. Girolamo took the lead in expressing his stance. Mr. Chalmers, please rest assured that I will never stop until the day when Paulie is kicked out of the restoration organization. Chalmers nodded with satisfaction. Great, Mr. Girolamo. I have decided to allocate £1,500 to help you run for Corsican Parliament. The intelligence agency agent and the spy sang together, which immediately aroused the passion of everyone present. £1,500 is 37,000 francs. With such a large sum of money for running, their electoral opponents have no hope of winning. In fact, even half of this money cannot be spent to hold an election for provincial councillors. Bartolome immediately followed suit and expressed his intention to draw a clear line with Paulie, followed by Eliarch, Cesar. Not long after, more than a dozen senior leaders of the restoration organization had received funding of 30,000 to 40,000 francs. Each one of them was happy and satisfied, and they praised Chalmers again. However, they all overlooked one problem. £20,000 was enough to fund more MPs, but Chalmers only distributed the money to 13 of them. So much so that their funds are a bit excessive. In fact, this was the strategy Joseph used to dismantle the Corsican Zionist party, divide and disintegrate, and then deflect political goals with financial support. The 13 people in this room will soon become a strong group in the organization, and gradually become separated from others. Chalmers could use his influence over them to try to get them to become independent and form another organization. The two restoration organizations will soon be in fierce competition for political resources. Who will remember the original goal? It has become a struggle for power only for the sake of power. After all, these congressmen have only been playing electoral politics for the past 20 years at most. For Joseph, who has witnessed later Western elections, as long as there is no spiritual leader like Paulie, just copying some dirty tricks of party struggle will be enough to defeat them. You must know that the Corsican Restoration Organization has its own armed force, the National Guard, and also breeds a large number of assassins. Officials sent by the French government to Corsica are often assassinated. Various riots have never stopped. The most recent one occurred at the end of last year. Nearly 1,000 armed rebels in the army fought fiercely for more than a month before they were barely subdued. If the army is used, as it was under Louis XV, it will not only cost a lot, but also the effect will not be very good except for forcing Paulie to go into exile. There will be no major results historically. Even Napoleon was defeated in Corsica. It was not until Napoleon proclaimed himself emperor that he dispatched a large number of troops to bloodbath Corsica. This was the complete solution to the Zionist problem. But because of this move, the Corsican people hated him deeply. After he was exiled, the Corsican people threw his statue into the sea and bulldozed his family's old house. Joseph did not want to use too many troops in Corsica. Even if he did not care about the huge military expenditure and the damage caused to Corsica, the military purge would make the Corsican people hate the royal family even more, which would not be worth the loss. There is no need to expect people who are alienated from the government to seriously engage in production and construction. So Joseph chose a strategy of disintegrating from within. If the cancer of Paul's restoration organization is dealt with first, no one will organize and incite the Corsican people to rebel against the government. If appropriate policies are then implemented to improve the people's livelihood in Corsica, who will have nothing to do to start a rebellion? Wouldn't it be nice to be a glorious Frenchman and let the Russians and Italians envy, and hate him? Without the support of the people, the Corsican National Guard would naturally not be able to maintain itself. Even if a small number of diehards have to be annihilated, it will be much easier than in history. At present, after several months of operations by the Intelligence Bureau, the Corsican strategy has achieved initial results and is just waiting to be closed. London. Paul's villa has been renovated, and there are no signs of being burned. Outside the gate of the villa, Mr. Paulie had a moment of tenderness with Miss Isabella in the carriage. and reluctantly waved goodbye to her. As soon as he turned around, he heard someone shouting anxiously in Italian, "Uncle, you are back. I have been waiting for you here for several hours." Paulie followed the sound and saw his nephew Cesare Colonna Paulie, the second commander of the Corsican National Guard, standing at the door. "Cesare, why are you here?" He immediately smiled happily and hugged his nephew tightly. Cesare patted his back hastily, then immediately distanced himself and said solemnly, "Uncle, the situation is not good." "Oh, what happened?" Paulie noticed something was wrong and hurriedly pulled him into the house and went straight to the study on the second floor. Cesare locked the door tightly and immediately said anxiously, "At the regular meeting last week, Bartolomeo, Cesar and others accused you of embezzling huge amounts of funds and colluding with the French to sell out the Restoration Organization, demanding that you be removed from the leadership and expelled from the organization." Paulie's face changed when he heard this, but he smiled again. "No one will believe such an unfounded accusation." "No, uncle, they have produced evidence." Cesare told Paulie about the property he purchased in the United States and the leak of the time of the riot. "They are slandering me," Paulie shouted angrily. "The money was burned, and I have never had any contact with the French." "I absolutely believe you," Cesare said hurriedly, "but the organization has formed a public opinion against you. Last week, 19 people voted in favor of expelling you, and another 12 agreed to suspend your leadership of the organization. 5 people abstained. These damn bastards." Paulie was so angry that veins jumped on his forehead. There are about 60 people in the Restoration Organization who have the right to vote on major events. Excluding those who are not in Corsica, there should be nearly 50 people attending the meeting, and 31 of them are against him. There are only 2 votes away from the 2/3 pass threshold. Chapter 494 broken to the ground. Cecily looked at Paulie and said seriously, "Uncle, I think you should return to Corsica as soon as possible to stabilize the situation. Otherwise, when the next rally is organized, the voting situation will be even more unfavorable to you." He just had to say directly that after the next vote, you will no longer be the leader of the Restoration Organization. Paulie paced back and forth in the room anxiously, shaking his head and muttering to himself, "No, it's impossible for me to go back. The French must be waiting for me on the dock. If I go back, I'll be finished." Cecily could only emphasize his tone and said, "Uncle, as far as I know, most of the people who abstained from voting also believed the slander against you. It's just that they were worried that the organization could not suddenly lose its leader, so they did not support Bartolomeo and the others." When Paulie heard this, he suddenly stopped and turned to look at him. "What did you say?" "I said yes. Some senior leaders of the organization are worried that there will be no one to take charge of the overall situation if something big happens suddenly, so they reluctantly support you. Wait until they choose a new one." Paulie raised his hand to interrupt him, with a stern look in his eyes. "You are right. As long as something big happens, they must rely on me. By then, all votes will disappear." "Big thing, you mean?" Paulie lowered his head and thought for a moment, then whispered to his nephew, "After you go back, send people to secretly burn Nongza village. Then leave some traces of the French, and declare to the outside world that the French are retaliating, and the revenge will be expanded to more villages." Cesare's eyes widened in shock, and he lost his voice. "Then, many Corsicans will die." Nongza is a village in the mountains. Almost all the villagers are staunch anti-French element. Their presence is indispensable in all the conflicts between Corsica and the French government. So, if something happened here, and it was said that it was the French, no one would doubt it. Such a major bloodshed will definitely arouse the hatred of the entire Corsica, and then someone will be needed to lead everyone to fight against the French. At present, this person can only be Paulie. People from other restoration organizations do not have this prestige yet. Paulie patted his nephew hard on the shoulder and said sincerely, "For the future of Corsica, for the freedom of the people, sacrifice is inevitable." Cecily took a few steps back in disbelief and stared at Paulie blankly, as if he had never known this uncle. After a long time, Paulie repeated it again in a commanding tone, and then he suddenly came back to his senses. The sense of obedience formed towards his uncle over the decades took effect. He lowered his head and murmured, "Yes, I understand. I'll go back right now." After Cesare left, Paulie was in a very bad mood for 2 days in a row. The Corsican Restoration Organization was founded by his father, and those idiots actually wanted to kick him out of the organization. He secretly swore in his heart that after this incident passed, he would teach Bartolomeo, Cesar and others a lesson. Yes, drive them out of Corsica. The butler's voice came from outside the door. "Master, it's time for you to go to the club." When Paulie heard the word club, he immediately thought of Isabella's youthful and beautiful face, as well as her slim and graceful waist. There was a faint reaction in some part of her body, and most of her previous unhappy emotions were instantly reduced by half. The so-called going to the club is a day when he has trysts with Isabella 3 times a week. He greeted the housekeeper and asked the maid to fetch his newly purchased French fashion clothes, humming a tune in his mouth. Second floor of the Tuileries Palace. Joseph turned over the latest report on the situation in Corsica and said to Fouche, who was sitting opposite the sofa, "You did a good job this time. So, what is the current situation of the Zionists?" Fouche leaned forward slightly and reported, "Your Highness, they are currently divided into 3 camps. One side is the anti-Paulie faction headed by Bartolomeo, who insists on expelling Paulie from the organization. There are currently 17 high-level members of the treason organization, and with our funding, they are the strongest. The other side is the loyal Paulie faction, headed by Giuseppe and Cesare Colonna Paoli. They deny all accusations against Paoli and there are 14 of them. There is also a moderation faction headed by Eliarch, who advocates investigating Paulie first and re-electing the leaders of the organization. There are 12 of them. In addition, several people have quit the treasonous organization." Joseph was a little surprised. He thought that it would be successful if he could split the Corsican Restoration Organization into pro-Paulie and anti-Paulie factions, but he didn't expect it to break into pieces like this. Some people were so discouraged that they quit the group. Yes, he picked up the teacup in front of him and took a sip, thinking, if this is the case, we can make a difference in the Corsican Parliament. Corsica's current political model is a high degree of autonomy. Neither the governor nor the royal family has any say, but the parliament. If you can control a majority of the seats in the Corsican parliament, you can use this to promote legislation, making it easier to reverse Corsican independence tendencies. For example, legislation stipulates that the governor of Corsica has veto power over parliamentary resolutions, or that Corsica's taxation does not then controlled by parliament, and so on. He looked at Fouche and said, "You passed that sponsor. What is his name?" "It's Chalmers, Your Highness." "Oh, let Mr. Chalmers use his influence on the anti-Paulie faction to urge them to break away from Paulie's organization and set up a new restoration organization. In the early stage of its establishment, we will add some of our people to it, and the organizational program should also try to downplay the content of independence." Fouche's eyes lit up immediately, and he nodded hurriedly and said, "Yes, Your Highness." It can be imagined that the opportunity for the establishment of this new restoration organization is to oppose Paulie. In the future, we can just sit back and watch the restorationists fight each other. Joseph continued, "In addition, I will personally instruct Count Beautiful to put aside his own little calculations and work hard to integrate all the pro-government factions in Corsica. Strive to get more seats in parliament." Count Beautiful is a representative of the pro-French forces in Corsica and has a lot of influence on the island. However, this person is very ambitious and has always wanted to be the great lord of Corsica and oppose the various new policies of the French government. But compared with the restorationists, he is very obedient and absolutely loyal to the royal family. Chapter 495 High-Tech Industry. Fouche said with some hesitation, "Your Highness, nearly half of the pro-government factions in Corsica have liberal tendencies. I'm afraid they will not listen to Count Beautifuoco's orders." Beautifuoco belongs to the old aristocracy. Compared with the restorationists, he hates these liberals who shout all day long to make the aristocrats and ordinary people equal. Likewise, he is one of the liberals' greatest enemies. When Joseph heard this, he blinked and said very decisively, "Then let Beautifuoco listen to the liberals." Tell him that if he, the liberals, and the anti-Pauli faction can take down Cosi with 2/3 of the seats in the Corsica parliament, I can make him governor of Corsica. In Corsica, the consent of 2/3 of the members of parliament is required to enact legislation. In fact, it doesn't matter if you can't win so many seats. Most of the liberals have nationalistic tendencies and are naturally incompatible with the separatist Zionism. Let them tear each other apart, and the people supported by Joseph will have a chance to come to power. In addition, letting beautiful Occo join the liberals can also contain them from causing trouble at critical moments. Even though Corsica is only an island with a population of about 200,000, it is also filled with various political forces and the situation is extremely complicated. So until the beginning of the 19th century, this place had always been a country within a country under French rule. Joseph then ordered Fouché. By the way, you also need to use Mr. Charmer's influence among the Zionists to find out the details of the Corsican National Guard as soon as possible. It is best to put some of your own people in it. He is not so naive as to think that political games alone can completely solve the problem of Corsica's division. Even if they control the parliament, the restoration organization with armed forces will most likely overturn the table, such as dissolving the parliament and directly declaring independence. But in that case, the restoration organization would lose its legal basis in Corsica, and the people would begin to oppose them. By then, if the army is dispatched to clear it out, it will not fall into the quagmire of Corsica's People's War like the emperor did. To be honest, the more than 2,000 people in the Corsican National Guard are vulnerable to a frontal battle, and having the intelligence bureau prepare in advance can make the elimination process easier. Only after the baptism of real swords and guns can France have absolute control over Corsica. Yes, your highness. Fouché held his chest high and accepted the order, and then heard Emma knocking on the door lightly outside the house, reminding, your highness, according to the schedule, you have to inspect the gas distillation plant in the afternoon. Okay, let's go. Joseph stood up, motioned to Fouché to go out with him, got into the carriage, and asked him about the situation in Tunisia and Tripoli. It wasn't until he arrived near the gas distillery in the northern suburbs of Paris that Fouché said goodbye and got off the car. Joseph's motorcade moved forward for a while and saw factory manager Dras Murdoch, the patent inventor of distillation method for making gas, DuPont, who invested in the distillation plant, and the director of the Industrial Development Fund, etc. were waiting by the roadside meet. For a moment, music sounded around the carriage, and people holding colorful ribbons or bouquets of flowers gathered around to greet the team. However, against the rough wooden fence of the factory and the black smoke in the distance, it looked rather crude. Joseph originally didn't want them to come to greet him. It was more practical to produce more gas during this time than anything else. However, later Dras said that this could be regarded as a ceremony for the official commissioning of the distillery, and he no longer insisted. When everyone saw the crown prince getting off the carriage, they all bowed and saluted. Joseph also greeted everyone with a smile, then gave a brief speech to congratulate the official start of production, and then entered the factory surrounded by a group of people. Manager Delis followed him and introduced enthusiastically, your highness, now 16 tons of coal can be retorted here every day, and the gas produced can be used by more than 5,000 gas lamps, lighting up 3/4 of the streets in Paris and the whole Palace of Versailles. Joseph nodded with satisfaction. He remembered that during the World Expo, the gas distillation plant that could be put into trial operation could only supply more than 800 gas lamps. 6 months later, this number had increased 5 times. This is also due to his large capital investment and personal inspection of the construction progress, so that he can achieve such high efficiency. You know, this is the first gas distillation plant in the world. I have no previous experience, so the speed is definitely a miracle. However, the government investment in the Paris gas lamp project alone was as high as 2 million francs, and investors such as DuPont who invested in the gas lamp company invested another 1.6 million, for a total expenditure of 3.6 million francs. There is nothing that can be done about this. After all, gas lamps are already the most cutting-edge technological products of this era, no less technologically advanced than Boeing and Airbus in later generations, so the cost is naturally high point, but such a large investment is definitely worth it. Not to mention that gas street lighting has improved the image of Paris and France as a whole, thereby greatly increasing the attraction of talents and investment. The real estate income brought by the street lighting project alone is enough to recoup the investment and make a lot of money. Darris looked east again and said with a smile on his face, "Your Highness, the second phase of the distillery is expected to be completed early next year. By then, not only will the entire Paris be able to use gas lights, but also the nearby town of Antoine, etc. There is ample gas supply everywhere. Oh, and Lon, the distillery over there should be officially put into operation around October." Under his leadership, Joseph and others bypassed a large pile of coal that was 3 stories high and saw a factory building made of large stones and wooden boards in front of them. The metal retort inside was faintly visible under the blazing flames. Red light. The chimney at the top of the building spewed thick black smoke, turning the nearby sky into dark grey. Dozens of workers loaded small carts with coal in front of the huge coal pile and then pushed it into the factory. Inside, someone was using a shovel to continuously add coal to the furnace below the retort. There are technicians on the side constantly checking the furnace temperature and various instruments. All the workers here were blackened from head to toe by soot, and the beads of sweat that kept rolling down washed out thin white lines on their bodies, as if they were wearing a Juventus uniform. Eamon was fanning Joseph vigorously on the side to resist the heat wave brought by the retort. Suddenly, he heard a voice as thin as a gnat coming from behind. "Viscount Eamon, can you avoid it first?" When Joseph heard this, he turned around and saw the maid. Her face flushed and her head lowered, looking embarrassed. He suddenly realized that all the workers here seemed to be naked from the waist up. In such a hot place, it was completely difficult for him to wear clothes. He hurriedly motioned to her. "Okay, you can wait for us outside the factory first." "Yes, thank you, Your Highness." Camellia turned around in a hurry, picked up her skirt stained with black ash, and trotted out. Following closely behind Joseph, Perna, dressed in men's clothing, turned to look at her and raised her head slightly as if in victory. Chapter 496. 2 francs versus life. After Perna returned from Silesia, she learned that Camellia had become the maid of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, and for some reason she felt an inexplicable sense of crisis, so she began to unconsciously follow the Crown Prince as close as possible, as if she was guarding against something. After entering the distillation workshop, Murdoch, a master of technology, explained to Joseph, "Your Highness, you see, this cylindrical retort is the retort I invented. The thick ring-shaped iron pipe around it is actually the furnace used to heat the coal in the retort. Oh, before entering the retort, the coal must be crushed into specified sizes. The crushing workshop is just opposite. After high temperature carbonization, the coal will coke and produce a large amount of gas. This process will last 10 hours. After that, we have to turn off the flame, take out the coke from the retort, replace it with new coal, and light the fire again." He pointed to a thick brass pipe above his head. "The generated gas is sent to the cooling room from here. However, the gas cannot be used yet. It has to be deslaked through several layers of cloth to filter out ashes, cinders and other substances in the gas. Then the gas is passed through multiple layers of paper to filter out the oily particles. After that, the gas has to pass through the gas scrubber. Oh, it's the tallest stone pillar on the east side. There are actually many wooden grids inside, which are filled with lime water, which can remove the sulfur in the gas. You know, burning sulfur will sting people to tears. A lot of ammonia will be dissolved in the lime water used for gas washing. This is what Mr. Lavoisier reminded me to collect this expensive ammonia." Joseph was stunned for a while. No wonder the technology of distilling and making gas could be patented. Speaking of it, it seems to be very simple to cut off the air and dry burn the coal, but the actual production process is extremely complicated. It is impossible to produce usable gas without one step. Take the desulfurization mentioned by Murdoch, for example. If you didn't take it into consideration at the beginning, when your distillery is built, the gas sent to the gas lamp will make people cry all day long, and the millions of dollars spent to build the plant will probably be lost. It has to be watered down. Without talents, like Murdoch and Lavoisier, even if they could bring advanced technological theories to future generations, they would only remain on paper, and not even a sou of profit could be created. He suddenly remembered the talent introduction plan he had planned before. Since he was busy, he didn't push it much. It seems that this matter will be put on the agenda in the future. As he walked deeper into the distillation workshop, Joseph couldn't help but frown. The smoke and dust around him became thicker and thicker, and he could no longer see clearly from a distance of 3 meters. At the same time, the astringent and smelly smell of coal ash continued to irritate him. It clogged his nose, making it almost impossible to breathe. He quickly turned to Eamon and said, "Please give me a mask, Muzzle." Eamon looked confused. Joseph frowned. He didn't know how to say the word mask, so he used muzzle cloth instead. It's the kind that doctors wear on their mouths. When Eamon heard this, he quickly looked at Perna behind him, who also shook her head with clear eyes. Only then did Joseph remember that he had never seen Perna or Dr. Lamach wearing masks. Could it be that this thing hasn't been invented yet? He pulled Perna over and made a gesture. It's a piece of cotton cloth like this, square, with ropes on both sides, that can be hung on the ears. Seeing that Perna was still shaking her head, he gave up completely. It's really an era where there aren't even masks. On the other hand, the manager Dras on the side took out a rag-like thing from his pocket and handed it over. "Your Highness, do you want to cover your mouth and nose?" Yes, Dras immediately gestured, "like this, covering your face." Joseph put the rag on his face, and his nose and trachea finally relaxed a little. Then he noticed that some workers also used this triangular rag to cover their faces, as if they were about to start work. He couldn't help but frown. In such a working environment, without a mask, he would definitely get pneumoconiosis very quickly. Some of these workers are even younger than me. Although the factory environment in various countries around the world was generally poor in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, since you saw it, you couldn't ignore it. He first exited the hot distillation workshop, took off his mask, breathed in the air outside, and then said to Dras, "There is something called a mask, which can effectively improve the situation of workers inhaling smoke and dust. Please find a tailor to customize a batch as soon as possible. From now on, all workers must wear masks before they can work." He motioned Eamon to get a pen and paper and drew a schematic diagram of later medical masks. Fold 4 layers of cotton gauze together, so the edges, nail ropes on both sides, and stick a wire on the top. When wearing it, tie the rope to the ears. Go up and press the wire against the bridge of your nose. Dras's face turned green when he heard it, and he murmured, "Your Highness, the thing you are talking about, a mask, costs at least 2 francs. There are more than 200 people in the distillery. This cost, all let the workers buy it yourself. So expensive." Joseph was a little puzzled, but he immediately understood. Cotton is not a cheap commodity nowadays. Ordinary people can only buy 1 or 2 cotton padded clothes in their lifetime, and they usually wear linen clothes. There is also iron wire. The size and hardness of the mask must be customized. If it cannot be industrialized and mass produced, the price will not be cheap. He sighed helplessly. "I will pay for the money. You can make the masks as soon as possible and distribute them to the workers." Thank you for your generosity and kindness," Dras said hurriedly. "However, I can't let you pay this money. It should be deducted from the company's account." "You don't have to refuse," Joseph said, remembering the difficult working conditions of the workers, and told Delos, "In the future, we will check the workers' health every 6 months and treat health problems as soon as possible. Oh, I will think about the cost of the examination. The only thing you need to do is organize the workers to cooperate." He thought for a while and added, "But workers cannot be fired casually due to health problems. The Industrial Development Fund is the largest shareholder of the gas distillery, and the Development Fund has the final say, so he can completely influence the rules and regulations here." Dras was extremely surprised when he heard this. He had never seen a superior who cared so much about the workers, and he was busy praising and thanking him. Joseph knew that workers must be given basic living and health protection so that industrial development could be stable and sustainable and there would be fewer worker riots. It's just that absolutely no capitalist will take the initiative to provide such a guarantee, which will reduce their profits, so legislation is needed to solve this problem. Protecting workers' rights seems to increase industrial costs, lead to higher product prices, and reduce competitiveness. But in fact, only a human worker can produce qualified products. As livestock workers, it is impossible to promote industrial development. Chapter 497 Factories Act. Historically, after European countries experienced the destructive exploitation of workers in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, they gradually discovered this problem and began to try to take measures. As an industrial pioneer, Britain took the lead in promulgating the Factory Act in 1802 to ensure the basic survival of workers. Note 1. The more important provisions include: factories are not allowed to employ children under the age of 9. Child laborers aged 9 and above can work 8 hours a day, and children aged 14 and above can work 12 hours a day. Workers are not allowed to start working before 6 a.m. and cannot go to bed later than 2 a.m. Factories need to prepare clothing that can cover the body for workers. In the first 4 years after entering the factory is obliged to ensure that they receive at least 2 hours of basic education every day. Factories must ensure minimum ventilation and set up protective measures for dangerous machines, etc. In the early days of the implementation of the Factories Act, British companies also complained, but it didn't take long for them to find that the efficiency of workers had increased significantly, and production costs were even lower than before the implementation of the Factories Act. In particular, high quality labor has become more abundant and recruitment has become easier. This is because workers' basic living environment has been guaranteed. The disability rate, disease death, and starvation death rate have been reduced, and most of them can survive long enough to become skilled workers. The result is that Britain's industrial competitiveness has significantly improved, further consolidating its position as a world leader today. After seeing the poor working conditions of the workers, Joseph decided to promote legislation to protect workers' rights as soon as possible. This will not only improve the lives of hundreds of thousands of workers in a large country, allowing them to live a life that is at least sustainable, but also improve the efficiency of French industrial production. Moreover, the labor security law can also become a sharp weapon in France's hands. Historically, after the UK promulgated the Factory Act, it immediately became a benchmark for human rights in Europe, and was praised by workers in all countries. Upon hearing the news, skilled workers from various countries flocked to the UK, bringing a large amount of talent and technology, which further promoted the development of the British Industrial Revolution. Later, other European countries realized something was wrong and had to follow suit by enacting similar laws, but they fell into passivity. After all, once the benchmark is recognized by everyone, it is not so easy to change the concept. In this life, Joseph will keep the aura of this benchmark in France. After returning, he summoned Mirabeau and Breteuil to discuss the framework of the regulations and strive to submit them for review at the next cabinet meeting. While he was thinking secretly, he heard Pernus say from the side, "Your Highness, you mentioned medical masks just now. Does this kind of thing also play an important role in medical treatment?" Joseph nodded. "It's true. Masks can greatly reduce the possibility of doctors being infected by patients during treatment. Oh, in fact, the bird-head masks that doctors often wear when performing surgeries have this effect." Pernus was a little surprised, but some scholars believe that bird-head masks are just ignorant superstition and will increase the chance of infection. "My father never wears this." Joseph had watched a documentary introducing the history of European medicine before, and he immediately breathed a sigh of relief and said, "That's because they rarely clean the masks, and that thing has become a petri dish for germs. But the masks definitely work." Having said this, he quickly reminded Manager Dras, "You should also wash your masks frequently, at least once every 3 days, and it is best for each worker to use a fixed mask and not to use them crosswise." When Pernus heard this, Her eyes lit up, as if she had seen another medical innovation. She greatly admired His Royal Highness the Crown Prince's medical skills and firmly believed that, as long as he said it would be useful, it would be fine. Previously, she wrote a paper about the double-blind experiment, taught by His Highness, which gained her considerable reputation in the medical community. Of course, the medical community generally believes that it was something figured out by the Dauphin and her father Lamech. She immediately begged, "Your Highness, I would like to distribute some masks to field hospitals and promote them to doctors across the country in the future. Of course, this is a good thing." Joseph nodded and then thought of the high cost of customizing masks individually, so he simply said, "Or, we can build a factory to produce masks. In the future, tens of thousands of masks will be consumed every month, just for medical and factory needs. It is necessary for factories to produce them in large quantities, tens of thousands." Perna said in surprise, "Your Highness, there are only more than 200 workers in the distillery, plus the doctors across the country. They shouldn't be able to use so many, right?" Joseph smiled and said, "Not only gas distilleries, but also textile factories, mills, chemical plants and even construction workers need this thing. I estimate that 20,000 to 30,000 masks can be sold every month." After talking about masks, Joseph visited the coal crushing yard under the leadership of Dras. Along the way, he talked with DuPont and other investors about the new gas distillation plants in Nancy and Tunisia. When an investor heard that even Tunisia was going to install gas lights with an investment of up to 2 million francs, he was a little unsure. "Your Highness, are there any risks in terms of income when laying gas lamps in North Africa? In fact, Nancy does not seem to be a very prosperous place. You have to see the long-term benefits," Joseph said. "Gaslight has a huge impact on the attractiveness of a city. Nancy's industrial development zone is the most mature, and it will be a densely populated city in the future. Tunisia has added at least 40,000 to 50,000 immigrants in the past 6 months, and Tunisia city will surely become the center of North Africa in the future." The investor nodded slightly, but still whispered, "I mean, with such a large investment, maybe we should be more cautious." This time, before Joseph could say anything, Dupont smiled and said, "Mr. Roland, you are too cautious. The prospects for gas street lamps are very good. As far as I know, the British Parliament has approved a grant of £300,000 to install gas lamps in London." The businessman named Roland's eyes widened immediately. £300,000 is 7.5 million francs. The British actually invested so much in gas street lamps. It seems that I was really worrying too much. Joseph frowned slightly when he heard this. Historically, it is not without reason that the British can become the pioneers of the Industrial Revolution. Their keen sense of smell is far superior to other countries of the same era. Note 1. In the early 19th century, the so-called Factory Act in the UK was not actually the name of a law, but a general term for many factory-related laws at the time. The most famous of these is the Apprentice Health and Moral Act, and there are also some fragmentary laws and regulations. Chapter 498, Doing Business with the British and Leaving Them with No Business. Obviously, the British saw the sensational effect of installing gas street lamps in Paris. In just 4 or 5 months, they quickly finalized an investment of more than 7 million and prepared to replicate it in London. It is enough to see how rich the British are. With such a start, they are probably about to start recreating the glory of the Eastern Roman Empire. He suddenly thought of a question and looked at Dupont and said, "Has the British mastered the technology of gas distillation?" This Dupont lowered his head and recalled, "I don't think they mentioned this technology." Joseph frowned. "So they are going to invest in gas street lamps?" Murdoch shrugged his shoulders and said helplessly, "Your Highness, the British are shameless in stealing technology." He gestured behind him. "There should be their industrial spies in the distillery now. As long as the funds are sufficient, they can copy a gas distillery as early as next summer." He spoke fluent French, calling Englishmen all the time, and he was already an authentic Frenchman. Well, his current assets and career are all in France. Not long ago, he was knighted in the Palace of Versailles, which means he has completely severed ties with Britain. Joseph frowned again. He knew that Britain and France had sent a large number of industrial spies to each other. No matter which side had something new, the other side would soon copy it. Historically, even a national heavy tool like the spinning jenny was cloned by France in just 3 to 5 years. It was only because of the domestic business environment and raw materials that it has not been able to compete with Britain. Moreover, Britain's scientific research capabilities are already very strong. After all, it is the leader of this era, and Murdoch was actually trained by them. So as long as they are determined to do it, even if they don't steal technology, they will probably be able to develop it in more than a year. Joseph was quite unhappy. He spent so much energy and invested so much money on gas street lamps. Paris hasn't attracted much talent and investment yet, and London is going to jump out to grab food and invest 7.5 million at once. You British people are rich, so what? No. He secretly clenched his fists. He thought that the British must not be allowed to handle the gas street lamps so smoothly. But how can he stop the British? It might not be so easy to catch industrial spies. Should he assassinate the British technicians responsible for the copycat gas distillation? He immediately rejected this idea. Dirty hands is always the worst option. The British can easily guess that it was done by France, which may cause diplomatic disputes, but soon, a sly smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Aren't the operations of those American arms companies in later generations applicable here? The standard process is probably bid at a low price first, get the military contract, squeeze out competitors at once, and then start to increase prices while making with the help of the monopoly position. Of course, his goal is not to increase prices, but to squeeze out British competitors and run away. Thinking of this, Joseph pulled Dauphin away from the others and asked, since you can find out that Britain is going to invest in gas street lamps, then you must have some connections there, right? Dauphin suddenly became nervous and waved his hand, saying, Your Highness, I heard about it from my business partner, and it has nothing to do with the British government. Joseph smiled and patted him on the back. I also have full trust in you. However, if I want to take over the business of installing gas lamps in London, can you find someone to help me connect? Dauphin's eyes widened in shock, and it took a long time to say, Your Highness, are you going to sell the gas street lamp technology to the British? Part of it is considered. Joseph nodded, but given the special diplomatic relations between Britain and France, you know, they may be more repulsive to French companies, so I need you to help me set up a company in the UK, or directly acquire one, and then inject capital, and then come forward to contract the gas lamp project in London. I can help with this, Your Highness. But I'm not sure whether I can reach a construction agreement with London City Hall. Joseph smiled and said, Do you think 300,000 francs can impress the Mayor of London and the project leader? Dauphin was shocked again. The prince was obviously very familiar with the routines in the business world, and he was very decisive. He thought about it and hesitated. Your Highness, this matter may also involve the British Parliament. After all, the investment amount is huge. Then, add another 300,000 francs to make friends with the relevant members of Parliament. Joseph said without hesitation. In addition, I will give you another 100,000 francs as a reward for hard work. Dauphin finally stopped refusing. The huge sum of 600,000 francs used for bribery should be certain. He nodded immediately and said, Your Highness, I will try my best. As for the reward for hard work, I'm very honored to serve you, so I really don't need it. Joseph said in a strong manner, You don't have to refuse. I will have someone give you 700,000 funds as soon as possible. Please invite Director Fouch. He turned to Telemond and then said to Dauphin, We need to discuss the details of this business again. Indian Peninsula Point on the outskirts of Seringapatam, the administrative center of Mysore. The Marquis of Wellesley looked at the Mysore position in the distance with a gloomy expression and asked his staff officer, Where is my heavy artillery now, General? The ground in South Canada is very muddy due to the continuous heavy rains. The 12-pound cannon can only move a few thousand feet a day. I'm afraid it will take another month to deliver it, since Arriving in India, Wellesley has almost swept all the way, using the piling up heads tactic to solve the Mysore fortress group in South Canada, and has pushed the front line to Seringapatam point. He was promoted to brigadier general because of this. Unexpectedly, his army encountered trouble in front of this city. Tipu Sultan always avoided a head-on battle with him, and through frequent harassment tactics, he dragged him until the rainy season came. 1 month. Wellesley scratched his shoulder hard. It was bitten by a mosquito as big as a mung bean yesterday, and it itched badly. I don't know if the supplies from Cornwallis can last for 2 months. Yes, only when the heavy artillery arrives can the artillery used for defense in Seringapatam be suppressed, and it will take at least another month to capture Seringapatam point. Before that, his army was repeatedly harassed by mosquitoes, malaria, dysentery, and sneak attacks by the Mysoreans. He really suspected that the morale of the army would collapse before the logistical supplies were exhausted. Since the rainy season, the logistical supply of him and Cornwallis has been almost cut off. A large number of warships carrying supplies were anchored in the port of North Canada, but they could not be transported in. The Mysoreans seemed to have been prepared. The city was very well stocked with ammunition and food, which was completely different from their previous style. Chapter 499. A different third Mysore war. Not far away on the north side, an Indian-style sedan slowly moved towards the British military station. Now there is water and silt everywhere in Seringapatam, making it difficult for even horses to walk, so you can only rely on human-powered sedans to go anywhere. Then, Wellesley saw Cornwallis, the Governor-General of India whom he was about to chatter about, step on the back of a bearer and jump down from the sedan. Although the servants had spread straw mats on the ground, a large amount of muddy water still splashed up, covering his legs. I was about to send someone to inquire about the remaining supplies over there, and you just happened to be here. Wellesley took off his gloves and stepped forward to hug the governor. I hope you brought good news. 1 good news and 1 bad news. Cornwallis shook off the mud from his boots in disgust and glanced at the chairs outside the command post. Do you mind if I sit here? Of course not. This is for you. Wellesley motioned to the attendant to bring another chair from the tent and sat opposite the governor. Then, please tell me the bad news first. Cornwallis raised his legs and asked the servant to wipe the mud spots on his pants, pointing to the teapot on the table. Please give me a cup. This damn weather. Oh, I want to tell you the good news first. After all, that's all. Then it's up to you. Actually, this is bad news. Savannah has shipped dried meat and rice. Yes, it's still damn rice. There is almost no wheat, and there is no bread. Cornwallis said, however, this food is enough for the army to consume until October. Savannah is a southern Maratha province bordering Mysore. Currently, the British Army's logistical supplies are blocked at Malabar port, and they can only get supplies from Maratha. However, all the Indian princes could provide was food and weapons, medicines, wine, military horses, and even tents had to be shipped from Europe by the British themselves. Cornwallis picked up the teacup and his expression darkened. The bad news is that the 4 transport ships that arrived at Malabar port last month will be the last batch. The Board of Directors of the East India Company has decided not to invest more money in the Far East battlefield. In fact, the company's negotiators should be arriving in North Canada soon. Wellesley didn't seem very surprised. He looked at the governor and said, in other words, there are not many opportunities left for us to organize an attack. He had learned before that this time the East India Company had invested £3.2 million in military expenditure in Mysore, which had exceeded the annual domestic tax paid by the company to the British government. This has resulted in the company having almost no profit this year, and will be greatly affected next year. It is said that the company's stock price has fallen rapidly as a result. Therefore, it is expected that the board of directors decided to stop losses. Cornwallis nodded. The expeditionary force will have to return home by the end of this year at the latest. Otherwise they will lose their military pay. I understand. Then let's wait for the heavy artillery to arrive and then have the final decisive battle. A month and a half later, Tipu Sultan looked at the misty rain, turned his head, and said to the guard captain, "Is the location determined?" "Yes, great Sultan. There are British cannons 2 miles ahead." Tipu Sultan nodded, turned around, drew out his saber, and shouted to the 1,700 guard soldiers around him, "Those infidels killed our relatives and friends, and threw innocent children into the pot for cooking. Now they are trying to invade Seringapatam. We must not let this happen. If you want to save your families and your children from becoming food for the British, then follow me, and send them back to hell with your knives." Through the propaganda of Salah, the former consul in Mysore, the devilish image of the British has now become deeply rooted in the hearts of the people in Mysore. It is generally accepted that every British soldier must eat a child every week to maintain his bravery. This rumor has even spread to Hyderabad, Karnataka and other British-controlled princely states. 3 months ago, there was an incident where the Udayagiris killed 2 passing British soldiers because they were afraid that their children would be captured and eaten. Therefore, the people of Mysore now share the same enemy and risk their lives to fight against the British army. The rain stopped. The Marquis of Wellesley waited until the ground became slightly drier and immediately ordered the 5,000 British troops as a corps to supervise the 30,000 Maratha troops approaching Seringapatam. At the same time, the 4,000 British troops of Cornwallis's regiment on the north side also launched an attack with more than 30,000 soldiers from the Indian princely states. Forming an encirclement of Seringapatam, the British 12-pounder guns began to roar. The 7 guns used their highest rate of fire to suppress the Mysore cannon 1 kilometer away with fierce barrages. The latter only had 10 8-pound cannons, which had to be dispersed for defense outside the city. The others were all 4-pound cannons, and their range was far shorter than the British heavy artillery. At about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Tipu Sultan and nearly 2,000 Mysore soldiers suddenly emerged from the rear of the British artillery position and pounced on the cannons that were firing wildly. The British infantry responsible for covering obviously did not expect an enemy attack and hurriedly beat drums and began to organize their formation. Tipu Sultan had taken advantage of the rain and slipped here through the gap between the British and Maratha troops because they were extremely familiar with the terrain and couldn't use telescopes under heavy rain. No one found their traces at all. Tipu Sultan took the lead and charged into the British infantry line with a machete without using a musket. These 1,700 people were his most elite guards. All of them were extremely brave. They took 3 volleys of fire from more than 400 British infantrymen in front of them and finally got close to them from the right wing. Fortunately, their attack was very sudden, and the British formation was not neat, resulting in a very unsatisfactory volley effect. After paying nearly 300 casualties, the Mysore's broke up the British infantry line, and then separated more than 1,000 people to block the reinforcement of the Maratha vassal army, while others took out iron nails to nail the cannon's fire port. At the same time, Tipu Sultan's eldest son Nawaz was leading 50,000 Mysore main forces to fight the British army head-on. These soldiers had been trained by Lafayette before, and they were much better than the armies of other Indian states in terms of formation and discipline. So, as long as they were not directly facing the British lobster soldiers, Mysore's defense line was as solid as a rock. And they could even launch a counter-attack locally. After the British troops came up, they exchanged a few rounds of fire, then quickly moved away and used the rear troops to continue delaying. The area outside Seringapatam was more than 10 miles wide, and there were many mountains that could be used for defense. On Tipu Sultan's side, after destroying 6 12-pound cannons and a large number of other artillery, the British reinforcement sent by Wellesley finally arrived. Tipu Sultan glanced at the already dark sky and immediately ordered a retreat. His fighting style was like this. He liked extreme adventures and sneak attacks without regard for his life. Historically, he relied on this style of play to deal with the world hegemon Britain in southern India for several years. Chapter 500 Lightning Coal Company. In the early morning, Tipu Sultan, covered in blood and mud, returned to Seringapatam with 800 or 900 soldiers. Yes, hundreds of people got lost on the way back. This was a very rare loss rate in the 18th century without navigation and night vision equipment. It can be seen how brave and good at fighting this tiger of Mysore was. However, his crazy adventure was worth it. He destroyed most of the British heavy artillery, and then the Mysore army could hide behind the defense line and delay the British army with artillery point before the British arrived at Seringapatam. Mysore had purchased a large amount of gunpowder and artillery shells through the Morocco-Ottoman transport line. Enough for their artillery to last until winter. According to Marquis Lafayette, the British will definitely retreat at the end of the rainy season. Tipu Sultan firmly believed in his prophecy, so he tried his best to stop the British army at the city of Seringapatam. Because of the fall of South Canada on the west coast, Mysore has found it difficult to obtain supplies from Morocco from the Gulf of Oman. If the British can hold out until the end of the year, Mysore will have no choice but to give up Seringapatam. In the following month, the British army launched extremely fierce attacks one after another, but Tipu Sultan repeatedly repelled the enemy with the defense line arranged by Lafayette before leaving, and his own bravery. Although he also paid a huge casualties of tens of thousands of people, the seemingly shaky Seringapatam has never been broken. Tipu Sultan frowned as he looked at the bodies of soldiers brought back from the front line every day, and his fear and hatred of the British increased day by day. He didn't know that at this time in history, the food in Seringapatam had run out, and the Mysore soldiers were panicked and would soon retreat. At this time, he had sufficient food and grass in his hands, and only lost a few border provinces such as Vijayanagar and South Canada. The core area of the kingdom was basically intact, and the national strength did not suffer much loss compared with the situation in the Third Mysore War in history, when he lost the administrative center of Seringapatam and all the territories east of Mysore. This was already a good deal. At least, if the British now asked him to pay £3 million in compensation in exchange for withdrawal, he would only say one word: get out. As September approached, the British offensive had obviously weakened. The Marquis of Wellesley had malaria and was so feverish that he could hardly get up, and his soldiers also fell ill in large numbers. In addition to malaria, dysentery was rampant in the army, and more than 20% of the soldiers lost their combat effectiveness due to illness. There were also some unnamed severe diseases in the army. Sometimes the sick people would bleed to death in just 3 or 4 days. The military doctor advised Wellesley not to let the soldiers eat rice. He believed that this was the main cause of dysentery. But Wellesley couldn't do it, because the British Army's warehouses only had this kind of food. Although the vassal army of the Indian princely states did not suffer from large-scale illness, their combat effectiveness was not enough to threaten the Mysore people. The British Expeditionary Force did not survive the rainy season after all. The commendation order issued by His Majesty himself and the commission for promotion to Major General were placed on the table beside him. Wellesley sat up on the bed with difficulty and looked at Cornwallis, who came to visit him, in silence. The gunpowder was on the verge of running out, and new cannons were impossible to be transported, and the Mysore's were still attacking them. Both knew that the war could only end here. The Manitus can't even make qualified gunpowder, otherwise they might be able to defeat Tipu with a few more attacks. Cornwallis sighed. Let Sir Sealy go to Seringapatam. Wellesley waved his hand. At least we can keep Vijayanagar and Canada, sir. Sealy was the East India Company's peace negotiating representative, and the northern part of Chitradurga, Cornwallis added, but the Mysore's also occupied Tiruchirappalli. The two looked at each other again, with helplessness in their eyes. The East India Company invested £3.2 million and sent out thousands of expeditionary troops, but only got such a result. London. In Mrs. Mordaunt's salon, a man with ordinary appearance, but wearing the most popular loose long coat, came to Mayor Mordaunt with a glass of wine and smiled politely. Dear Mayor, I didn't expect to see you here. It's so lucky. Mordaunt turned his head and was slightly stunned for a moment, then nodded and said, is it Mr. Styler? Oh, we met at the City Hall last time. I am very honored that you still remember me. Styler smiled more brightly and exchanged greetings again. After everyone around the mayor left, he took a few steps closer and said, Lord Braverman should have mentioned our company's sincerity to you. You see, about the gas lamp project, Lord Braverman was the relationship that Dupart found. He was mainly responsible for helping to bribe British officials, and the commission was very low, only 2%, which was considered to be very face-saving for Dauphin. Mordaunt just smiled and said without comment, "You know, the Parliament attaches great importance to the installation of gas lamps in London. My report must be convincing enough for the parliamentarians to decide who will undertake this project." Styler immediately said, "Please rest assured, MP Mordaunt is familiar with the strength of our company, and he will definitely support us." Mordaunt is the main force in the parliament to promote the London gas lamp project. Mayor Mordaunt was quite surprised. He did not expect that this unknown lightning coal company could not only find Lord Braverman as a lobbyist, but also establish a relationship with Councillor Mordaunt. If he did not exaggerate, he could consider accepting his kindness. And Mr. Coffey's technical opinion letter. Your company must get his approval before. Styler smiled and said, "His opinion letter should be submitted to you tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. I promise you." Of course he could guarantee it, because the technical person in charge of the London Gaslight project had already received a benefit of £2,500 from him, and even handed over the pipeline layout plan for London to him. "Oh." Mordaunt raised his eyebrows. "I'm really surprised by the efficiency of your company. Our company has invested a lot in the gas lamp project. You see, if we can't undertake this project, our shareholders will suffer heavy losses." Styler lowered his voice. "In fact, the £8,000 can be negotiated." £8,000 is the bribe amount he promised Mordaunt before, which is 200,000 francs, which is still far from the authority given to him by the Crown Prince. And this lightning coal company was established in the UK with the help of DuPont. After completing all the company resumes and injecting tens of thousands of pounds, it was specifically used to undertake the London gas street lamp project. At present, the company's apparent boss is a Scottish friend of DuPont, and the company manager Styler was recommended by the French Minister of Commerce. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.